we don't show anyone online.
All right, then, that closes public comment for now, and we'll move on to general, I'm sorry, we just had a hand go up. Public comment just got reopened. Go ahead. If you're making public comment, please know that you have 3 minutes, and Ms. Holt will be letting you know when you have 1 minute left. Go ahead, Deb.
Jim Mogensen is the first one, and you are unmuted.
Yep, this is Jim. We got the technology figured out. So one thing I wanted to bring up as you go forward with the zero emission bus thing, I know I speak at a lot of these meetings and I can kind of get into public comment tinnitus, but I kind of anticipated a bit of an issue. So a couple of months ago, you created the climate executive limitation and did it as an executive limitation. And there was also a financial issue relating to executive limitation. And as I look at the conversation swirling around the zero emission bus conversation, it seems like it's mostly means kinds of things that people are talking about. And I'm just envisioning a monitoring report that is separated into each of those two executive limitations. And how are you going to decide which one is okay and which one isn't? And part of the reason that I've been thinking about this is I remember back when we had the hybrid bus conversation. I know I've mentioned this before, but it was another theme of the same kind of a thing that in fact ended up causing financial challenges. So I just kind of bring this up to make sure that as we go forward, as the authority goes forward, it thinks through these issues. As always, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mogensen. Deb, is there someone else?
We do. Give me just a moment. It is Charles Griffith, and you are unmuted.
All right, am I on now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Well, hello, everybody. It's great to see all of you on my screen, at least. And for those who don't know me, I'm Charles Griffith with the Ecology Center and former board member of this august body. Let me just start by saying, as someone who served almost 10 years on this board, I thank you all for your service and dedication to helping this agency perform at its best. And I also share my appreciation of the staff that works every day to provide essential transit services to our community. As some of you know, my work at the Ecology Center is all about decarbonizing the economy, focusing on transportation and energy sectors. So I have a keen interest in this discussion that's been going on, and I'm certainly very excited about the fact that the agency is now seriously evaluating its options for cleaner, low-carbon fleet of buses. Your CEO asked me to be one of the reviewers of the agency's bus propulsion study completed earlier this year. And I've had numerous conversations with him and other experts and a few of you board members about some of the options that are before you today. I know that a lot of thought went into the proposal for the board's consideration to pursue a hydrogen bus strategy. But I do take issue with some of the arguments that are being made and have kind of a little different perspective that I'd like to offer. I know there's probably, in 3 minutes, there's not a whole lot of detail I'm allowed to get into. So let me just say up front, I'm happy to have longer conversations with anybody about this. But let me just offer a couple points. There's a lot of good reasons for why hydrogen is being considered as an alternative to electrification of bus fleets in general, given sort of the longer range and sort of the easier drop-in replacement, to sort of current practice. But there's still a pretty big caveat that that while acknowledged in the proposal, I don't know that it's been sufficiently captured at least in my view, and that's the cost of the fuel. And while I'm interested in hearing more, perhaps tonight, about the sort of new hydrogen fuel pricing that Matt, you seem to have found. Most assessments suggest that the fuel could be anywhere from 2 to 5 times more expensive than current diesel fuel costs. And while there's going to be major efforts with federal funding to help spur innovation to bring those costs down, it's really no guarantee that it will come down that much to reach in parity with diesel. So again, while I'm not totally sour on technology as a future propulsion strategy, I think it does have a pretty big risk, and one that I would put pretty high up on the list. And I would just sort of ask the agency and the board whether it's willing to sort of bet its propulsion technology strategy on that kind of risk on the one hand. And on the flip side, battery electric technology, I think, has been perhaps maligned a bit too much in the recommendation, because it actually does offer an opportunity for significant cost savings compared to diesel. It doesn't really require a breakthrough, as I think has been suggested, but just the steady progress of technology improvements and cost reductions that we've seen over the last 10 years for battery electric vehicle technologies could essentially solve the range issues that are the primary concern and risk factor, I think, for battery electric buses. So I guess I would ask that, do we really want to rule out or dismiss a technology that has more proven opportunities to reduce costs, and which has a lot of potential to fulfill all of the agency's sort of propulsion needs with technology improvements, but also can today offer cost savings on many or most of the routes or blocks, I think, as they're referred to, that the agency runs.
Mr. Griffiths, you've gone over time by about 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so let me just wrap up by saying, happy to talk about this more. I just really urge you not to sort of dismiss battery electric too soon, and please consider having backup strategies for either direction you go.
Thank you. We have someone in the gallery. Would you like to speak, ma'am?
Not on that.
We're open for public comment right now. Did you want to speak at the end?
Public comment just in general or for response? This is the time for public comment.
It's right now. It's public comment in general.
Okay.
When you come to the mic, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from, and welcome.
Thank you. This mic or this mic? Testing. Okay, I guess it's this mic. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kurtz. I go by Lit Kurtz. I sell the Ground Cover News in Ann Arbor. I hope some of you are familiar with it. I have lived unhoused for most of the decade. Well, let's see, I lost my housing in 2013 after the district where I worked laid off 4,000 of its teachers. So that's where I have sort of been for the last decade. And during that time, I've ridden the bus, and I found that there doesn't seem to be an actual plan for people who are living unhoused. And so I'm here on behalf of the unhoused community. People who are unhoused frequently have a lot of luggage, a lot of belongings. that we have to carry just for survival, just to keep our, lives together. Also, for our livelihood, also, there are bottles and cans that people get in large quantities so that they can make enough to sustain themselves. So, or ourselves. So I just wonder if, hi, Matt. I think I met you one day riding on the bus. Okay, do you remember me? Okay. So yeah, I'm just wondering if the bus, if AATA has any plans now or for the future in the bus design, in adding a different sort of bus type. I noticed that one of the newer buses, or maybe all of them, have a space right behind the driver's seat. And I don't know if that's intended for people who are unhoused or just people who are grocery shopping. I don't know, but I'm just curious in knowing what you have planned, if anything.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, and don't everybody speak at once, but it's all good. Thank you.
Deb, is there anyone else online just in case before we close this out?
Nope, we have no more online.
All right, thank you for everyone for your participation. We will close out public comment and move on to general announcements. I will start us off. I know the board always loves to hear about task forces, but every year we have an audit task force, and it is now time to assemble it. The audit task force work is going to begin the week of the 11/27 through 12/8 between staff and UHY. The audit is scheduled to be completed by the end of January. We'd like to schedule or to have the task force assembled no later than 11:30 with at least 3, but 4 members would be more ideal. The kickoff meeting will happen the same week as the meetings between UHY and staff, 11/27 to 12/8. Further timelines are the audit report will be reviewed by the end of, will be sent in by the end of January, and then the meeting with the auditors and staff will begin in February. The reason for this meeting and why the staff are on the task force is the auditors report to us, not to staff. We're the ones who have to review it and accept it, if I'm remembering correctly. And Dina, if I've forgotten anything, would you like to add? Perfect. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand now, but if you could get with me over the next few days, if you're interested in performing on this task force, that would be very valuable to our board. So thank you for listening to that. And then I'll open it up for any other general announcements. All right, seeing none, we will go ahead and close that portion of our agenda. And we're going to move on to the consent agenda. I would like to have a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I'd like to, can I, excuse me, I'd like to make an amendment to the consent agenda.
Okay, Jesse?
I would like to amend the consent agenda to correct the October meeting minutes. We all, in front of us, have a handout for agenda item 4.1. The last paragraph wording needs to be fixed to accurately reflect the conversation that was held. I could go into more detail if board members would like.
It is on your desk. Does anybody need some extra time to review that, or do you feel comfortable moving ahead? All right, then I would like to enter, Jesse made a motion to have the agenda, or have the board meeting minutes from October 19th, 2023 amended with the new language that is at your desk with regards to a meeting item. And if everyone is in agreement with that, let's go ahead and take a vote.
We still need a second.
Is it on the amendment or on the minute?
We first, I think, need to take it on the amendment and then take it on the consent agenda, or is it in the reverse? Am I getting it wrong?
We still need a second on the
Right.
amendment. We need to then approve the amendment, and then we can approve the consent agenda.
Right, and that's what Susan was asking. So first, we're going to take a vote on the amendment itself with the new language. Yes, Susan?
Oh, no, I just have another amendment, but we can go for after this one.
Okay, so the first amendment is the written language is at your desk, and Jesse has put a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Well, seconded by Kyra. All those in favor, raise your hands. All right, thank you so much. And Susan, what is your interest?
So mine is just a minor correction to the minutes. The list of questions that were listed under the board minutes that were for the next board meeting, has the organization looked at a green bond for the project? What I asked was, has the organization looked at bonding for projects? And I was speaking to the capital costs for our future transit centers. I was looking at, BRT projects, not the project of the buses under discussion, and not a green bond. I don't even know what a green bond is.
So what you're asking is to have the word green eliminated because
And
that would-
eliminating the project. So it would be, has the organization looked at a bond, period?
All right.
Issuing a bond, period.
All right, so Susan has made a motion to change the language to reflect more accurately what was said at the last board meeting, which, will you repeat that language for me, please?
Has the organization looked at issuing bonds?
Wonderful. Do I have a second? Jesse, all in favor, raise your hands. Thank you very much. That was successful. So now that we've gone through all of that, important work, we're going to go ahead and look at the consent agenda as a whole. And do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda with
Moved.
Simi and seconded by Kyra? Everybody raise your hands if you're in favor. Thank you very much. It passed unanimously. Next on the agenda is ownership linkage, open dialogue task force, and that is Mr. Chang.
Yep, thanks a lot. So I think an update was given last board meeting, so I wasn't able to attend, but Matt, Kathleen, and I did attend the Ann Arbor City Council meeting. And it was a great update by Matt and the team. Our hope and long-term goal is that we'll be able to bring Kathleen into that conversation, but we're just taking small steps at a time. So getting in front of them was a huge win. I think our next time we'll be in front of them is for their one of the December City Council meetings. We are also in the process of trying to get in front of Mayor Brown from City of Ypsilanti. I know they've had a lot on their plate, but we're just trying to win our way into her schedule. So I'll give you an update as soon as we make that happen. That's it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Rich? Thank you, Rich. Moving on, we're moving into monitoring treatment of the traveling public, and that's Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The monitoring report begins on page 17 of your packet. We are reporting full compliance. The Service Committee reviewed this at length, and they are recommending adoption as a level A. We did have 6 board members complete the survey. Thank you very much. That definitely helped with the discussion. That completes my introduction of it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Carpenter? I understand that the Service Committee reviewed treatment of the traveling public. I believe that they recommended A as in compliance. Is there any discussion on that recommendation? Seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion to Jesse?
I'd like to move that we accept the monitoring report as A in compliance.
Do I have a second?
Second, Rich.
Seconded by Rich. All of those in favor, raise your hands. All right, thank you so much. Moving on, we have compensation and benefits 2.3, and again, that's Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This monitoring report begins on page 35. Again, we're reporting full compliance. The Finance Committee reviewed this one also with great discussion. We had a survey response of 5. Again, lots of good dialogue there. This Finance Committee did recommend adoption at a level A.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Carpenter at this time? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to accept? Did you want? I thought I saw your hand go up. Yeah. Apologies. All right. No, it's important that everybody has a voice, so thank you for trying to catch that. Does anyone want to make a motion on this report on how to receive it? Mike?
Yes, as Matt said, the Finance Committee did review that, and we recommend A, and I make the motion that the board accepts A.
Would someone like to second that motion? Chris? All those in favor, raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to policy development and public safety, that is Mr. Miller. Jesse.
All right, so so this is on page 59 of your packet. As the board will likely recall, during the August 17th meeting, Board of Directors, there was a contingent of members of the traveling public that had voiced concerns that the ride was beginning to enter into discussions to create a what they called a police substation at the YTC. And while we were able to clarify the conversations that had been had, I had spent a certain amount of time thinking about that and the policies that we have in place, establishing like any sort of expectations about the unacceptable outcomes or the any sort of limitations that we might want to put on how public safety in and around our services is managed. And I thought that particular conversation kind of spoke to that we, there is a list of the policies that we have that kind of get into that touch on it, but the policies that we have are rather vague, leave a lot of either room for interpretation or don't really request interpretation. So for instance, 2.1, the policy that we just approved, that the CEO should not cause, allow, or fail to address conditions, procedures, or decisions that are unsafe, undignified, disrespectful, unclear, or overly intrusive. And to this point, we haven't really gone into what, we haven't asked the CEO to clarify what those are. And we've accepted his interpretation that is clarified in the subsequent policies, but we don't really go into much detail on that. So that there's also been an ongoing concern of how riders perceived safety in and around our facilities and our buses. There are certain segments of the population that are less likely to feel safe riding a bus, particularly at night, or riding a bus, waiting at a bus stop. So, and this is this isn't limited to us. This is a nationwide issue that transit agencies are dealing with. How do we promote a sense of security, having people feel safe while using our services? And I wanted to bring the question to the board that this might be something that we want to address. So I hope you have all had a chance to read the issue brief. I did not go into my proposed answers to the questions. So attachment 1, the policy development framework, lays out the 4 questions that we are expected to answer before we address an issue. And I am requesting that the board take a look at these questions and determine collectively if this is something that we want to address. And if so, figure out who will take responsibility for that.
Thank you, Jesse. So the board is to consider what is the nature of the issue and is the issue within the scope of the agency? What is the value that drives the concern? And whose issue is this? Is it the board's or the CEO's? And the final one, is there already a board policy that adequately covers the issue? If so, what has the board already said on this subject and how is this issue related? Does the board wish to change what it has already said? So now might be a good time to initiate dialogue between board members to see, if what your thoughts are on this proposal of looking into a policy by answering these questions. You don't have to answer them out loud, but any questions that you may have or concerns to the negative would be greatly appreciated.
And I think, if I might, I just, as the one who's brought this issue up, I might just throw out, I think, that, you know, I think I've explained the nature of the issue, and that is very much within our scope, that this has to do with with the treatment of the traveling public. The values is making the value that people feel safe, and that is actually something that has been expressed in policy, though our past monitoring reports and approval of the same indicates to me that further policy development is necessary. I believe this is a board issue, in that while we will not be explaining, I'm not looking to tell the CEO how to achieve public safety. I do think it is important for us to set limitations and outline some unacceptable outcomes. And while we do have board policies that touch on the issue, I think the monitoring report that we just voted on and the fact that this issue has not come up indicates that further policy is necessary.
Susan, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that I support your effort in exploring this on a couple levels. One, as a transit user, my goal is ridership, and if there's something standing in the way, if there's an obstacle, I think we should explore what elements might be preventing people from riding. And two, as someone who loves cities, buses are the life's blood of cities. And our transit centers are in downtowns, many of our stops are in core areas, and I think it's a great question to explore. If people don't feel safe, if they don't feel comfortable, it has an impact beyond just us. It has an impact in our larger community. I think post-pandemic, all the rules have changed, and I think it's time to re-explore what this is about. And I just wanted to note, coincidental to this, we have the safety report that I'm sure we're going to hear more about later. Metrics are being captured, all sorts of things are being examined, and I think that what you're offering up is that we're building on, this is not new, we're building on the shoulders of people who've come before us. And I think it is worth an examination at the board level, just to ensure we have our policies in place. And then from that, you know, staff can certainly play their role. So just to lend support to the conversation as it may take shape.
Thank you, Susan. Are there any other thoughts or questions? I suppose the question on my mind, I think this is excellent, and I agree with Jesse that not only do we need to think about the safety of our passengers, our drivers, and the general community at large with regards to our transportation system, but we also have to think about, we want to look at how to do it in a way that doesn't affect people who are marginalized or underserved and things like that in a way that negatively impacts them as well, that presents the best of both worlds. Jesse and I have spoken, and I'm wondering how the rest of the board feels that if this were to be taken on by the service committee. Would you support that? And Jesse, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I am perfectly happy for the service committee to take this on, but I do want to bring up the idea of forming a task force to open up participation to people who may not be on the service committee who have an interest in discussing this topic. I think that would be, so if there are members of the finance committee who would like to be involved in this but don't really want to attend the service committee meetings, we could set up a separate time dedicated to talk about this issue. I have had a preliminary conversation with Rose Mercier about this. She's looking into to see if any other organizations that use policy governance have addressed this topic before. I think in particular she was going to be looking at libraries because I think they do deal with some of the same issues that we do. So yeah, I am happy to have the service committee take this on, but if there's anyone outside the service committee who would like to be involved with this, then I think we should form a task force.
That is a very good point. I suppose where we should start now then is, does anyone outside of the service committee wish to participate in that? And if not, there's no shame. Because then that would drive whether or not we have a task force. So seeing no other interest, I think going to the service committee would be best.
Are there any members of the service committee who have concerns about adding this to our workload? Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you again, Jesse. We're going to move on to operational updates, and we're going to hear the financial report, quarterly 4, from Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. The fourth quarter financial statement is in your packet. It begins with the issue brief on page 61. The finance report, the fourth quarter financial statement was reviewed in detail with the Finance Committee. I will just mention some highlights. Some highlights for the fourth quarter is that the initial close, this is the initial close of the budget for the year. We are ending the year on budget with expenses being about 1.5% below budget, so about 0.8 million below budget. We are anticipating the year to provide a surplus of 8.8 million, which will be placed in the capital reserve. As final adjustments are made, that number could fluctuate somewhat, but primarily we expect this to be what the financials will look like once audited statements are completed. Through the end of the fiscal year, we've actually used 51.9 million of federal pandemic relief funds over the last several years. And we have approximately 6.8 million left to spend in fiscal year 2024, which is consistent with what we budgeted. We continue to maintain all of our required operating capital and insurance reserves as required. Investments remain stable. And that concludes my general highlights of the year-end report. We'll be awaiting financial statement review with the audit task force and final financial statements coming out somewhere around probably February or March timeframe.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for our CFO? Or go ahead, Mike.
Yes, just let me add a couple of things. As Dina said, she presented this to the Finance Committee last week. We went through it in a fair amount of detail, certainly much more than Dina went through it tonight. We are very happy with the way the finances for the TheRide are going. One thing she didn't mention, we have a very strong cash flow too. We are very happy with the outcome of the year, although, as Dina pointed out, these are not the final numbers. They still have to go through the audit, as our chair brought up a few minutes ago.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to our zero emissions bus discussion, and that is Mr. Carpenter.
Well, good evening, board members. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. Excited to be back for part 2 of this ongoing conversation. So we have some new information responding to your questions, which, based on the discussion about the minutes, I'm glad that we got it right on the slides and the further discussion. So that's good. We have some new tools to bring back to you as well. So let me move forward. I'm going to endeavor to speak much less in my presentation this evening, leaving most of the time open for discussion and your questions. I'll recap just a few key points, provide responses to your questions. We've been starting to drip feed those back to you over email, but we'll also have some things in the packet and some new information this evening. Then really open it up for further discussion and then sort of wrap up closing statements. You do have some additional material at your desks. You have all these slides printed out. Feel free to make notes. You also have a budget spreadsheet there. There's a revision to that, and I'll touch on that when we come to it. So just as a recap of the staff recommendation, it is for a pilot project of 2 hydrogen buses running about 4 to 5 years, mostly due to procurement That's how long it would take. We expect to run the buses for about 12 months. 2 buses, 1 outdoor fueling station, a lot of training for staff, and if successful, this is really intended to lead the way into full transition of the entire fleet. So we've had a lot of discussions. I've spoken with a couple of you by email or in person. Over the last few weeks, we had just good discussions at all of the committee levels. We've continued to get sort of a trickle of public comments, and I'm reassured that sort of the key issues that we highlighted last month, that this is a question, I think, in large part about priorities, as well as risk tolerance, really, I think, continue to resonate as key themes going forward. And they dovetail very well with what policy governance charges you with as a board through your policies, deciding what we do, for whom, and at what cost. And I find myself returning to those phrases. So a couple of the key concepts that we talked about last month, or that we introduced, the idea of customers ahead of the equipment, for who is the system for? I want to acknowledge that that is an inherent prioritization and open for debate. I want to put that out there. The importance of carbon savings, that the climate is changing. We see that effect on a daily basis now. It is a situation, and steps need to be taken. The question of fuel energy density and travel range, what effect that has on the equipment, and how that trickles down into the economics of fleet management, how it may or may not affect customers and the budget, and that we are moving towards, or trying to move towards, full deployment, but that may take some time. So this month, we introduced in your packet a new tool. I want to take a moment and ask you to turn to page 67. As you know, and as we've sort of been discussing this evening, the board directs and controls this agency, by speaking with one voice through your approved policies. Those are the marching orders you give to me. What am I supposed to be doing? And the parameters of executive limitations. Generally, we deal with that once a year as I give you the monitoring reports. We have not before attempted to grade a single decision in terms of its compliance with all of your policies, with the possible exception of the budget. And there are some parallels between this decision and the budget decision. The CEO makes a formal recommendation to you. You decide whether or not to accept, reject, amend, do something else, I think in both sorts of cases. So we're using your policies and a qualitative grading scheme here in this table to sort of help structure our discussion and in our responses to your questions. So the first set of policies that you have for us are your strategic goals, which are your ends policies. We see them here. I've also added the environmental sustainability policy of 211. It's an executive limitation, but I think it's important enough for this discussion that it should be on the front page. And of course, the circles here trying to indicate degree of impact, admittedly qualitative, and I welcome discussion on any of these line items. This is how we can decide which rabbit hole we want to go down. The important thing about this one is that by and large, the choice of propulsion system in and of itself doesn't have a huge impact on the ends per se. Yes, there is an end statement about environmental impact, but when we moved our own operational footprint into the executive limitation, that one's primarily about sort of our external ability to improve the broader environment with our services, not the services themselves. I just want to make sure we're not double counting in this grading. Also, as we get into discussions of financial risks and other things, we're not trying to capture that here. This is just, does it matter what's driving the wheels of the bus in terms of how to achieve these goals? By and large, it really doesn't have a huge effect. Because most of your ends policies about increasing ridership, the propellant used really doesn't have much of an effect on that. Similarly, sort of down through all of them, with the possible exception of public opinion. We think there is certainly a segment of the population that this really matters to. But it obviously makes a big difference when we look at the environmental sustainability policy, that diesel does not have any potential to be eliminating emissions entirely. It's gotten a lot better over the years, but it'll never get to zero. The other ones do have that potential, so they get higher marks in that regard. Okay, we will return to those tables throughout the evening, and you have that in your packet. You did ask a number of questions. I'm going to start responding to your questions and mix back and forth with those tables. So one of the questions that was, I think, front and center last month was, what's the board's role in this decision? Do we just have to accept the CEO's recommendation? And I want to take a moment and just hit that one head on. So as I think you all know, but for the public, the board sets the direction of the agency through your ends policies, the goals. You delegate to me with parameters through the executive limitations, and you provide oversight through monitoring. Then we bump into these occasional isolated decisions. The board, the budget is one, this is another, where I would characterize it as a sort of a hybrid decision-making because the board has a direct vote on the final outcome. So for this particular discussion, for zero emissions buses, certainly I am obligated to give you my best professional advice, my recommendation. You are not obligated to accept it. I want to be clear about that. As with the budget, you are the board. You can approve the recommendation I submit to you as it is. You can reject it. You can direct me to go in a different direction, or you can use your own motion, through normal voting parliamentary procedures to make any other decision that you as a body see fit. I just wanted to clarify that, sort of head on. The board does require, the FTA does require you to approve a specific document called a transition plan. I'll touch on that later. That is really just their format of documenting whatever your decision is about moving forward. So as we write that, it will reflect the direction you give to me through whatever mechanism you choose. So questions you gave me. I'm not going to read these slides. I'm going to try to skip over them quickly and leave time for discussion. What would we do if full deployment was successful? Essentially, we'd celebrate. We take, we take a bit of a victory lap there. We'd be very happy. Staff would come back to you around 2029, 2030 with a detailed financial proposal. This is what it looks like to fully deploy this. Here's a recommendation about how long it might take. And you would have an approval in there. Most likely that would be in the capital and operating budget approval process, where expenses would go up to acknowledge what those additional costs are expected to be. This graph, which you saw last month, attempts to illustrate how we might phase out the gray diesel buses while we phase in a green hydrogen bus fleet. At the same time, we want to acknowledge the light green. That's the fleet growth expected as part of the long-range plan. The bus rapid transit, the higher frequency services, all of that. The fleet needs to grow at the same time. As those new buses would come on, they would come on with the new propulsion system. The pace of all of this would very much be a subject that we'd bite that off when we get to that point in terms of 2029. A lot can happen between now and then in terms of government funding opportunities. So we have to kind of wait until we get to that point. The flip side of that question was, what happens if the pilot is not successful? The short answer is we take a pause, we get a better direction. Mike and I spoke with a member of the public this week who was very concerned about this issue. And I think something I said to them that I think I would like to repeat to you and to the public this evening: there is no ego involved among staff in this decision. Hydrogen is like a screwdriver. If oops, we grab the Phillips head and we need the flat head, okay, just get a different tool. It's not a big emotional investment for us. So if we get to a point down the road quickly or after some time where this decision no longer makes sense, staff will have no compulsion or resistance to coming back and going, no, that didn't work. Let's change direction. We'll need to assess what that looks like. We come to that. Will batteries be a better alternative by that time? Will some other technology be better suited? I don't know, But I do want to just reassure everybody that if the pilot is for some reason not successful, we find a different path. You have an executive limitations policy. We're not going to ignore that. We'll just have to keep chipping away at it until we find the right way to do it. Impact on emissions. I think a big subject of discussion last month was the emissions generated by the production of the energy itself. We sort of had a discussion about, is our focus on emissions from the tailpipe or emissions from upstream, the plant or wherever the electricity or hydrogen is generated. I want to say up front, we're still working on this one. I have a number of to-dos that are still sort of incomplete. I suspect we'll have more on this, but I do have a few things I want to share with you about this point this evening. There's a lot we don't know, and a couple things we do know. I'll start with the things we do know. We do know that hydrogen requires more energy to create it than it produces. We know it is less efficient. So that right there, I think, is sort of an energy knock against hydrogen. Wherever that energy is coming from, it's less efficient. The flip side of that is the energy density discussion that we had last month, particularly for a vehicle that has to carry its own fuel. This is a really important factor. When it gets into range anxiety, it can affect fleet size and overall a lot of fleet management issues. So those are things we do know. Things we're still struggling with, I want to be right up front with this, we're still getting our heads around this one. Fair comparisons with how much emissions are created by electrical generation and greenhouse gases is a little tricky in some respects. We certainly understand that gray hydrogen is created usually by fossil fuels, primarily natural gas, and directly emitting the carbon into the atmosphere. Very dirty, and especially if it's less efficient than just burning natural gas to create electricity, obviously it's more polluting. Okay, that makes sense. Blue hydrogen is the same thing, but with plans to capture the hydrogen and maybe inject it in the ground, carbon and capture and storage. We share some concerns about how viable that, the horse is out of the barn, we're going to put him back in the barn attempt. Don't know how well that's going to work. We certainly understand that. So compared to green renewable energy, yes, those sources, a little questionable. But we're struggling a little bit with an apples to apples comparison. Are we comparing blue and gray hydrogen to completely green electricity? Or are we trying to compare green hydrogen to green electricity? Looking through, we note that the grid right now is still using a lot of fossil fuels. So trying to nail down exactly what the comparison is, we don't have a final answer for you this evening. We're continuing to work on it. We want to acknowledge that both of them are evolving quickly. The state legislature this month, I think last week or two, passed a law that says, DTE and consumers' energy need to move towards 100% clean by 2040. That's wonderful. That could certainly spur innovations. But the future is very uncertain. And I should mention also, the Department of Energy, as we discussed last month, is dropping a lot of money on hydrogen production, some of it here in our own backyard. But the future for both of these is very uncertain. And I mentioned last month a certain lack of information about the future. What is going to, what the emissions and price of these fuels and energy is today is maybe less important than what it's going to be in the future. And it's very hard for us to know what the results in the future are going to be. The graphs up here are my attempt to graphically illustrate being in the blender of trying to read this information, because there's an enormous amount of mutually contradictory or conflicting information about the forecasts, the projections, what to expect going forward. On one hand, I have a lot of confidence in the Sierra Club. They do not like hydrogen. The Department of Energy, I also have a lot of confidence in them. They say, yeah, we're going to put some bets on hydrogen. The International Energy Agency does not like hydrogen. Toyota does. So heavy hitters with a lot more money, a lot more resources, a lot more engineers, and a lot more incentive to bear down on this question are telling us this. That's the information that I have. So right now I can't give you, a crystal ball that functions perfectly about where we're going to be 10 years from now on these sorts of things. So that creates a bit of I think of it as like an event horizon. The information we need exists in the future, and we're not there yet. So answering the question about how much emissions hydrogen and DTE produce 5-10 years from now, it's very hard for me to give you a definitive answer. We're going to keep working on that. One thing we do think is important, and this is a new version of a graph you've seen before, that we think will help guide this discussion, is that the future is probably more important than where we are today. What this graph shows, and you saw it a moment ago, it's the same fleet transition, but this time we're not including the expansion vehicles. And the red this is illustrative, this is no math here, just please bear with me, tries to show the savings in emissions from switching out the buses. Obviously, as we get cleaner buses in the fleet, the emissions grow. But the real benefit on the emissions is not at the beginning. It's in the future. Even the emissions we save during the transition period between now and the mid-2040s, that nice increasing slope, is not nearly as much as we're going to save over years and decades into the future. So that's kind of a way of thinking about the importance of the future in this decision and the challenges of making a decision when we don't have perfect information about what the emissions or price of fuel is going to be entirely in the future. Okay, we were also asked about the risk of fire. I want to be clear about this. Statistics are not especially helpful. We've discovered there's not really good, reliable data on the number of bus fires that are out there. There are about 70,000 diesel buses out now in the United States. Fires happen, but they're rare enough that I've only personally encountered one of them in my 20-year history. So they happen, but they're not common. There probably aren't 10,000 battery electric hybrid buses that have ever been created in North America. So we can't really do an apples to apples sort of incident per 10,000 bus kind of figure for you to tell you the rate of it. Certainly when a battery bus catches fire, it's a little more noteworthy because it's new. So we recognize that seeing a lot of these anecdotally in the newspapers might be because they are happening more frequently, but it could also just because it's getting more publicity. So not entirely, can't determine that. But we do believe strongly that the seriousness of a battery fire is of a different order of magnitude than a diesel fire. And it really comes down to what does it take to put the fire out? And what happens if it occurs in a crowded garage? Diesel buses burn. I don't want to suggest they don't. So could a hydrogen bus. When a battery bus burns, that lithium ion battery, it's very hard to put out, and it can create some significant complications in attempting to preserve or save your facility and the rest of your fleet. So we want to acknowledge that. Okay, impact on the financials. There's a lot here. So generally you see here on the board, the risks are higher with the battery buses. We'll talk, I'm happy to go into detail about any of the things you see here. A lot of it relates to the potential for fleet growth, which as a commenter earlier today mentioned, it does relate directly to energy density and range anxiety. So that has a lot to do with the financial risks built into our assessment of these technologies. I do want to talk about the budgets because this is something you specifically asked for. You asked for details of the hydrogen budget. You asked for a side-by-side comparison with a pilot project. That is the sheet in your board packet with a revision here for you tonight. Happy to go into detail about this at the end. A couple things I want to make a point. I want to talk about the revisions. Before I do, I need to note that as you look at the detail, I do not want you to think that that means certainty. That is not the case. A lot of things are shifting in here. Case in point, I need to give you a revision to the fuel estimates for hydrogen. Long story short, they went back up. Why did they go back up? And this actually happened the day we published the packet on Friday. We believed we had found a reliable supplier for green hydrogen out of state, unfortunately, for a very reasonable price, 7 to 8 kilograms or dollars per kilogram, which was pretty competitive. Still more expensive than diesel. I don't want to disagree with that, but a lot better than earlier things we'd seen. So we're very excited about that. It's from a company that had been around for some time. It's still here. But they released their third quarter financials on Friday afternoon and said, basically, we have a cash flow problem. You can sort of feel the floor drop out from under you. Like, oh, we're going to have to walk it back a little bit with the board. So I don't like doing that. But we agreed we wanted to be right up front with you and not try to go back and quickly change it. Because this is not dissimilar from battery folks who were dealing with Proterra going bankrupt, whose assets have just been like sold off this week, actually. Oddly enough, the battery technology went to Volvo, which is Novabus. Great. Yeah, I'm thrilled. This has happened. We're revising this. The costs have gone back up because we don't want to put all our eggs in the basket of a company that's having some difficulty. So we're putting more conservative fuel estimates in there. It does affect the cost of the hydrogen we're willing to. And the table you have at your seat, the numbers that have been changed have yellow in the cell. So you don't have to hunt and peck through the whole thing. If you want to just look at the ones with the yellow-orange tinge to them, they're the ones that have changed. The pilot project reflects only 2 buses, so we need to take that into consideration. Doesn't reflect fleet growth, does not reflect the large hydrogen station that would be needed for a larger fleet, but it does continue to show the pattern that the hydrogen pilot project would be more expensive than a comparable battery pilot project. I don't want to mistake that or misrepresent that. However, as the fleet grows, and this gets back to the full deployment argument, we expect the economies of scale of hydrogen to kick in and become more and more competitive. We only buy the hydrogen fueling station one time. The charging units will have to be bought for every new bus. Priorities and equity. These were some questions that came up and were, I think, a subtext to your conversation last month. Reality of limited resources. We have a lot of competitive grants out there for the long-range plan projects and zero emissions buses, but we have to bring some money to the table. That's our local match. Right now, that's our capital reserve. The funding there is limited. We do have other projects, all sort of, I want to say competing, but right now we need to find a way to figure out which ones go forward and how fast. The reality is that spending all our money on one project may mean a lot less for the other projects. We are working to stretch dollars. We are working to find more revenue sources and look into other options, but the magnitude of the need is such that we will never entirely get away with this, or away from this, excuse me. There was a question about equity that was raised last month. I think it was specifically kind of a 2-parter. One, do we have an equity concern about if we get a zero emissions bus, what neighborhood does it go in? What route should it be on? We will have to rotate it through every route in the system, but we can handle that. We are not concerned about that operationally. We don't foresee any Title VI complications from the pilot project, regardless of technology. But the equity concerns really do start on this point about priority. Which projects are we advancing? Which ones are we not advancing? Some of our public commenters have spoken to that in the past, and we would agree with that. This graph you've seen before last month. And yes, I have been told that it resembles a swordfish. Put that out of your mind. You probably can't unsee it now, but this is really our attempt to illustrate a broader cash flow need. So the bar graphs on the top represent each project and how much funding we expect to be required, where it's expected to, or how much it's going to cost. The red area represents the capacity of our local capital reserve today. And obviously it gets drawn down early on by projects that happen to be at the front of the queue. Later projects, we go into these red bars hanging off the bottom, the stalactites, if you will. Yeah, that represents a deficit. I did hear from one of you last month that you found this graph intimidating. I do want to just reassure everyone, this is pretty common starting off a large capital program. You always start with more needs and aspirations than you have money for. We will continue working on it. We will find money, but it will affect the sequencing of projects and frankly, the timing of it. We may not be able to do everything as fast as we might like, but the overall issue, and I want to direct your attention to the early years, right now our #1 capital project has been for some time the Ypsilanti Transit Center. And you see that that is, the ZEB pilot project is in there as well. But that one and a few others are primarily drawing down the capital reserve. Unless we find more money to backfill the YTC, we could exhaust the capital reserve on that one project. That's how fast this stuff can drain. So it is really, really important that we have good projects that are shovel ready, that we can take them to funding agencies, but that we're also honest with ourselves about our priorities. Other questions we got last month, bonding. We didn't think about it as a green bond. We thought about it as bonding in general for capital projects. The work here continues. We think there may be some utility. We're happy to discuss it this evening. We've done some preliminary work. We think there might be some utility. It looks like a very narrow path, not a huge amount of yield. It has to do with the enabling legislation for us and that we just don't have the same latitude to bond that maybe a municipality does. There may be other financing options that make more sense, but we're happy to discuss it. The Finance Committee did ask to take a more of a deep dive on this, so we will be coming back to them as well for that discussion. How fast could these technologies be deployed? At this point, it's kind of a horse race. Once upon a time, I think a few years ago, the electrics, the batteries were faster. There was certainly a perception that they were easier to approve because you didn't have that big fixed upfront cost of the fueling station for hydrogen. I think it made it easier to get through the political approval process that gave it a reputation for being faster. At this point, the manufacturing timelines are about the same. It's 18 to 24 months from order to delivery. And that's, diesel buses are a little better. And this is historically bad, 10 months, once upon a time. I can remember the glory days. It was a good time. This is normal. It's a combination of pandemic handovers, part supplies, labor shortages. The industry is in a lot of flux right now. But if we start all the facility modifications while the bus is on our order, that shouldn't delay the implementation either of them. But it does raise the question, are we concerned about the startup or the completion? Which one do we want to do more quickly? And how does that affect our thinking? Another question, I think it might have been from Kyra, was how competitive are the grants? The answer is extremely. There are hundreds of applications. To summarize, it looks like several hundred got a B or an A rating last year, but only ones that got funded were the A pluses. So we not only have to ace the test, we have to do all the extra credit. So we are already having discussions internally among staff about how do we build our grant proposal to ace the test and get all the extra credit. We're pulling in outside partners to help us with this. But I'm starting to get a little nervous about the deadlines. I do want to get started with this so that we're in a better case to win. Mixed fleet, could we do one hydrogen and one battery bus, for example? Pardon the apples, we're not buying apples, but I'm trying to symbolize it. Didn't really see a lot of operational benefit to that. It duplicates a lot of costs and frankly, staff energy. The organizational capacity that staff have is limited. I'm trying to husband that and focus it. We have a great relationship with the U of M Transportation Department. I was speaking with their director just yesterday. They're more than happy to continue to share what they learn from their battery electric buses. So I do believe we kind of have a head-to-head test going on in the community with these two. We do have some practical considerations. As I mentioned, there's only room for 2 buses outdoors. We don't want to store either type of bus indoors during the pilot due to safety concerns. Kind of raises the question of the minimum operating size to do a good pilot. Two seems more reasonable than one, frankly. Hedging bets. I think there's an implicit idea in this concept of it. Maybe we can hedge our bets, minimize our risk if we picked one of each. Yeah, to a degree, and we know that some other transit agencies have done that. We're trying to hedge our bets with the pilot project to limit our financial exposure, but again, to make sort of tangible progress. Really success, our pilot is about learning. It's not about which technology is frankly going to be the winner, because that decision is going to be determined outside of Ann Arbor, outside of Michigan, by macroeconomic forces and technology developments that are way over my head. Is there a battery breakthrough or steady enough improvements? The price of hydrogen coming down? Those are things way beyond our ability to control or influence. I think those are the factors that'll ultimately lead to sort of the decisions that make or break either of these choices. Lessons from other agencies. We were asked about sort of peer comparisons. We sent out some preliminary information. Some of the agencies furthest along here, I sent it out by email to you. You should have this. Let me know if you don't. Foothills Transit and AC Transit out of California. California has a mandate, state mandate, I think zero emissions by 2035 or 40. California is aggressive, so the California agencies are moving faster than anyone else to try to get there. So it's not surprising we see some of the most aggressive information coming from them. Our Stantec report, which is online, does provide some case studies and some meta studies that have been done, although that one's already a little stale. I'm going to be honest with you. It's about a year old, and some of that stuff is already kind of, I don't want to say obsolete, but dated, because this technology is moving so quickly. Most of the deployments that are out there are small. People are putting their toes in the water. I was coming to why is there a picture of foot here? I was coming to that. Less than 10 buses. These are relatively small deployments, but we are aware of one fleet, the Antelope Valley Transit Authority in California, that has fully transitioned its 87 buses to battery electric. They're the only ones, or the first one in 2020, to make that transition, and the only one to date that we're aware of. They're a bit smaller than us, and their operating model is a bit different. They seem to be more involved in express services than we are, but that's the one example, and if the board's interested, we could probably dig into that a little bit more. Some things you asked we're still working on. As I mentioned, emissions from generation. We're going to keep digging into that. You had asked about the implications or impacts from mining and battery disposals, both of which are reasonable things. We are compiling a what we've heard report, just the general public feedback that we've received, and then finalizing those cost figures. So as I begin to wrap it up here and open it up for your discussions, the recommendation, we appreciate all the comments and questions we've gotten. The recommendation is still, I feel, strong, still makes a lot of sense. And I'm responsible for the global executive constraint, that's policy 2.0. And it says, among other things, don't do anything imprudent, or as Eric Mahler used to say, embarrassing, stupid, or illegal. When I summarize the implications here, you see the chart here. Battery gets dinged because I fear future mandates. I fear not making progress on climate action. I fear tie barred to other grants that we need. Diesel's not good enough. Battery, hydrogen, there are some risks, maybe half and half. Battery worries me the most simply because it's risk. It has more hurdles to get through, and some of them can create significant financial challenges. A recap for everyone about our timeline. We introduced in October. We're in the middle of our discussions with you now. We are hopeful that we can begin to get decisions from you, perhaps by December or January at the latest. Then we would be moving towards final approval. Then I'll talk about the two-tiered approval in a moment. Grant preparation begins. We expect the grant deadline in March or April. What drives that? The federal government budget. If there's a shutdown, it can throw a bit of a monkey wrench in there and delay things. So a lot depends on sort of how that process plays out over the next few months. And then if we submit in April, we'll probably know, I would guess October, simply because it's before the general election in 2024. And that's a great time for politicians to make announcements about funding decisions. So that's what I would expect. Board authorizations, a little bit of new information here. I do believe there's a two-tiered process to this. There's a little bit of construction regarding this pilot project and the fueling station. I think it's kind of on the edge of my interpretation of the construction policy, but I want to use that to say, let's assume it does apply, and then I need your authorization. That gives us a mechanism to say, do you as a board approve me submitting a grant like this? And that can be your decision-making mechanism. There's a process for this. We've done it once before. We can sort of run that play. We'll probably also ask you for permission to tap the capital reserve in future budgets, not an immediate expense, but in the future. And then probably in February or March, we'll finish that transition plan, which again is a very regimented document that the feds need to see. It might even be a consent agenda item. It's just a documentation of our collective decision, of your collective decision. That would be your hard approval. At that point, I've got everything I need to hit send on the grant submission, and hopefully we would be ready to move forward in there. Beyond that, if the grant is submitted and it is successful, we're committed. We can't back out of it at that point because the feds will never give us any money ever again. So at that point, we are committed, and what that would mean to you is that future budgets would have those figures baked in, and we would need to accept those expenses as part of those future budgets. But you know, we've seen them in the documents, so it's not a surprise. Public feedback, we are still taking public feedback. We have information online. Written snail mail comments are still accepted, and people are certainly welcome to come here and make a presentation. And then one last thing I want to say about the pilot project. I still believe that it provides, you know, a very practical, it's very basic on the technology we have available today. It tries to make reasonable assumptions about what's likely to occur in the future, although I confess my crystal ball doesn't completely work in this case. It provides a tangible, visible symbol of progress intended to move towards full deployment. It addresses risks, many of which are in your executive limitations. But it also puts some clear deadlines on when full deployment needs to happen. We start to have milestones in there. We start to see how this project should work. I believe it is affordable, and we do have really good opportunities with these federal grants. 80 cents on the dollar is really good from a federal perspective. So I would certainly hope we were able to take advantage of that. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy my colleagues are here, happy to begin helping you in your discussion in any way we can.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. And with that, we're going to open it up to the board for questions and comments. Mr. Miller, Jesse.
Yes, I'd like, I was hoping you could clarify something for me. So in one of the slides you said, I think you had indicated that you believe that the hydrogen fuel cell buses are less of a risk, or will have less of an impact on other capital projects as compared to the battery electric bus pilot. But in the side-by-side comparison, the cost estimates, like kind of across the board for the fuel cell buses are higher. Can you square that circle for me?
Absolutely. It pertains to time frame. In the short term, yes, the battery electric pilot, comparable pilot would probably be less expensive, but the costs in the out years could grow considerably. Particularly the risk is on range anxiety and fleet growth. If we get to a point where we have to grow the fleet to maintain the same level of service, as many of you know, the garage is at capacity, that triggers some very difficult financial conversations. Hydrogen, again, long-term, so yes, the pilot, the battery would be cheaper, but the longer-term issues are more complicated. Longer-term, we think the batteries would cost more.
Okay, so I think that might have been why I was confused, because I think I think I was conflating the pilot with the technology. So
may
you're
have-
saying, okay.
I may have given you every reason to.
So,
get
I
confused.
mean, would it be fair to say that a battery electric bus pilot on its own would have less impact on our other capital projects than the hydrogen fuel cell pilot?
If we look on the amended budget, if you look starting on line 52, you can see the capital implications of that. You see the total capital cost range for the battery bus of 4.5 million to 6.8. It's just the capital. You see the breakdown. If we get an 80-20 split broadly from the feds, our section would be 912 to 1.3 million versus the local share of the hydrogen, which would be 1.3 to 1.7. So yes, the battery pilot would have less impact immediately on the capital reserve.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Kyra?
Are we able to see the examples of A+ grant proposals?
We've been working with our assistants in Washington, D.C. I don't know. Dina, do you think we would be able to get, I mean, we could call the agencies directly and ask them to share. What do you think?
Are you referring to grant proposals where they've submitted for the same kinds of grants that we're submitting for? Or,
Where they have received the funding?
So maybe who won low no last year?
yeah, so I do think that the consultants that we're working with have experience in that arena. In terms of just getting actual proposals, we'd have to try to see if we can get them from agencies.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned, the consultants that we're working with are pretty involved in the way the process goes and all of that too. So we're leveraging that first. With
extra-
other knowledge just gained by talking to other agencies.
The FTA probably wouldn't give it to us, but if we asked nicely of the winning agencies, they might. But our associates in DC kind of already told us what the extra credit is.
Okay.
And help me out here, Dina. Workforce, this is a big deal. These are basically Biden administration political priorities. Workforce training. So you're getting rid of internal combustion engines. There's a workforce that's dedicated their lives to that. How are those folks going to get retrained? So workforce training. Justice 40, which is an equity issue. I think it's largely based on race, but also maybe gender.
I'm not sure.
We'll have to look more into that. Justice 40, workforce housing, spec differences. They've gotten it into their heads that it's a big problem for agencies to have different specifications for the buses, so they want us all to sort of converge on the same design. I think they're barking up the wrong tree, but we've got to sort of make our bus as uncomplicated as possible. And there was one other.
There was an employment portion where it might generate additional opportunities.
It was, yeah, it might have been it. There's something else, but we're happy to sort of next time remind you what those exactly were. So they're very much sort of politically driven things. And there is when you send in a competitive grant, formally, officially, it is a fact-based objective and no political considerations enter into that.
Right.
Technically. But we do know that there's other factors as well.
I would just add that they are upfront with what the extra credit needs to be. It's not like a secret. They list out, you'll get extra consideration if you can demonstrate success in these areas. It's a matter of how successful you are compared to others in demonstrating the success in the areas. So it's a publicly known formula. It's just a matter of how well we're able to demonstrate our project would be successful or more successful on hitting all of those key points.
Yes, Rich.
Thanks. So one, I want to say I greatly appreciate the effort that the staff and especially Troy has put into this initiative. I mean, the amount of data analysis provided for us to make a decision is impressive. What I'm about to ask is probably not going to be super popular, but I'm just going to ask it. After going through the report and looking at this side by side, I'm seriously just wondering, like, is the timing right for us to go this route of ZEB at this time, right? Especially in regards to the fixed route buses, or should we actually wait a little bit longer? My comments definitely aren't to be interpreted that I'm against zero emission buses, nor that I'm against alternative propulsion methods, nor against the environment. I definitely would like to see a reduction in carbon footprint, but there's a few things. One of my main targets as a board member is to increase ridership. And for me personally, I don't see how us going to ZEBs is actually going to increase ridership, right? It's not like I feel like that there's people out there waiting for us to convert and bring these on board, and they go, okay, now I'm going to start riding the AAATA bus routes. Looking at this particular initiative, one, there's a lot of progress and info still being figured out. That's concerning for me. My whole career has really been around risk mitigation and risk decisions, and both of these technologies are still, in my view, evolving at a rapid pace, right? Do we need to be at the front of this tech and spend money to get a PhD in this? I don't think so, but that's just my personal opinion, right? Two, there's the financial piece, which is something that I'm going to dive in a little bit. And then there's also the staffing needs and the cost for them to roll this all out, right? Versus focusing their efforts on increasing ridership and also the long-range plan, which we as a board approved, and we got a millage to fund that. So when I looked at the budget for 2024, at least the draft budget, if I understood that correctly, there's about $5 million expected from fares for that. The total cost for the recommended hydrogen pilot, it looks like it's around 7 to 9.5 million. And the rides portion of that is 1.6 to 2.05 million. But irrespective of how that's paid, right, that's still $7 to $9 million spent on a smaller pilot program. And so that's like $2 to $4 million than what we're expecting to bring in for just fares. And that's, again, a pilot, that's not a full rollout. And so the long-term concern I have is that I'm terrible at public math, but I'm pretty certain that even if there continues to be some kind of government subsidy, it's going to cost a lot larger amount than what we bring in from fares. And I've brought this up in the past where I'm like, hey, can we go to a zero fare environment? And at that time, I was told, no, we can't afford it. But if we're about to spend right now 7 to 9.5 million, even if part of that subsidizes, it makes me kind of question, like, is it actually possible and doable for us to look into alternative fares? In regards to the bus emissions, and this goes to that comment around our impact on the carbon footprint, right? So the A20 plan, they did a study and they said, and it was in one of the slides there too, that it's 0.5% greenhouse emissions for our region is from us. For us to spend this amount of money to reduce that 0.5 down to 0 potentially, right? Where I sit there and go like, okay, well then what's that other 99.5 that's contributing to the greenhouse emissions in our region? And one of those larger contributors I figure is probably single-use cars. And so I look at that on the other side of, well, if we're able to convince more people to ride our buses, that hopefully means that we're actually having less single-use cars emitting all this carbon into our air. And so again, there was a statement that was made in one of the documents that the greenhouse emissions from us is small, but the cost to decarbonize at the time looks to be very high. And I think the numbers are showing that. And then just maybe an alternative route is I know that there are requirements for us to do this, which is something we have to consider, but I'm wondering if we can look at this from an agency perspective instead of just a bus perspective, right? Because all this discussions has been around the large buses that we have in our fleets. But I know the AAATA has a lot of other vehicles. And so are there other ways that we can actually roll out, focus on the various vans and the other light vehicles and the trucks that we have in our fleet, especially since I don't know if it translates from the residential side where there's a lot of tax benefits for residential EV rollouts. Do we also qualify for that? Right? So basically in summary, what I'm saying is the timing right for us to do this? And then if we have to go the alternative fuel route, is there a way that we can actually maybe have something else be part of that initiative? And maybe it's not like the full buses, or if we do, maybe a third alternative is actually like a rollout that's mixed between the buses and the actual other vehicles that we have in our fleet. So, thanks.
Thank you, Rich. That was very provocative, but appreciated. Susan?
I have a couple to offer. First, one of the questions I asked last time, and I don't know that it found its way into the presentation, was what are the metrics of success that staff will be using to gauge the success of this pilot? And the question was specific because I wasn't sure why it would take 5 years to gauge success. And so I would like to have staff come back to us with the metrics that you'll be using during this pilot project. Yeah, to the point, are we gaining ridership? Are we reducing costs? What are you saying is success? It's success that the vehicle hasn't blown up in the garage, or it buys us time so we can make a bigger decision. But I saw that if it's successful, if it's successful, if it's successful. And so as that was repeated several times, I don't know what that would look like. So I'd like staff to give us the metrics that you'll be using once you've secured whatever buses to determine what that success looks like. Because I don't understand why it's 5 years, other than we're buying time for the technology to mature. So that's the first question. The second question is, let's roll the dice, let's choose a technology for the pilot, and we say it's not successful. Can we not just sell the buses? I understand the point about not mixing the fleet, but find a system that has rolled the dice and selected hydrogen, or find the system that rolled the dice and bought electric. Sell the 2 buses and then choose a different path. So I don't know that it's the big decision that it is being portrayed. I think we learn by doing. So I don't know that that's necessarily a be-all, end-all. And then, again, back to this question being asked to us about technology, I think we've opened the door to being able then to weigh in on this other fleet. I like the point that Rich has just made. I would like, by the time we make our decisions on the big fleet, I would like us to, at the same time, be making a decision about the smaller fleet, all the cars, the trucks, the smaller vehicles, and our transition plan for those. Because I think, to your point, those can be accomplished more quickly. I think we demonstrate commitment to our community. I think we demonstrate our commitment to the federal government. I think it's going to be one of the things that we will be looked at if we're really serious about our goals. And waiting until 2030, I really do think it's important that we show the transition plan as vehicles are being traded out. What is the transition to another propulsion on those vehicles? And a plan that is brought to us that we can approve perhaps as a sideline or a side piece to the larger plan. I'd like to hope that that could be accomplished at the same time we approve the bigger plan. I think that's a great idea. I really support that. So thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Carpenter.
If I might, just because it's come up about the auxiliary fleet, the non-revenues, the pickup trucks, the vans. We do see much greater potential there for electrification, and it has to do with the duty cycle and how frequently they're not moving and could be plugged in. We've actually already taken one swing at a grant to begin electrifying the vans. We were not successful in that, but we did take a shot. We have separate studies planned specifically for electrifying the auxiliary fleet, and then beyond that, the facilities, which does include the park and ride lots. So those things are on our to-do list. I don't know if staff capacity could bring all of that together at the same time as this decision. I'd have to look into that and chat with my colleagues. But I just do want to reassure everyone that's not off the radar, just that this conversation was focused on the bus fleet.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, if I could just,
Of course.
a follow-up, just a question I forgot to ask. Another question I thought that my comrade here to my right made, another one got me thinking. Are the costs that you show for 2 additional vehicles to our system, or do those 2 buses supplant buses that we already have? I don't know what that means. Is this an addition? I know there's a capital cost for new vehicle.
Yeah.
But the operating costs, do that supplant the costs we would have had otherwise? Or is this in addition to our budget?
So as we understand the grant programs that we're shooting for, they have become less restrictive. In the past, maybe even 5 years ago, these were only available as replacement programs. So if you bought a battery bus, you had to get rid of a diesel bus. That proved problematic because agencies said, I need 2 electric buses to make up for that one thing, and that program stalled. These programs today, it seems like the feds have sort of softened on that. We can use it to expand the fleet. So these would be new buses. We would go from 103 buses to 105. We don't need additional storage space because they'll be parked in the back by the dumpster. The bus doesn't care. In terms of the net impact on the budget, I don't have that information right now. We're trying to represent just the magnitude of costs of running these two. Yes, presumably there would be a corresponding savings of 2 diesel buses not being run quite as much. Presumably it would be the same for both if they have the same amount of running time, so it kind of nets out.
Any other questions? Simi?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the comments that have been made by the board members so far. And specifically, Rich, I understand that the hesitancy around zero emissions buses in the immediate. And, I think I disagree with that point. I think there's benefit to moving forward with a pilot at this stage, but also completely agree with your other points around the auxiliary fleet and also ridership. I think there's a lot of untapped potential with ridership and exciting things we can do if we potentially start transitioning zero emissions buses and the light fleet around advertising and public campaigns and that sort of thing. So just wanted to voice my support there. Matt, I had a question for you, sort of around what's led us to the point we're at here. So you mentioned, bringing to us the recommendation for hydrogen is sort of the best professional advice in selecting a technology that can lead to full deployment of zero emissions buses in the fleet. And I'm just wondering, if the goal was slightly different, or that question we were trying to answer, rather than can lead to full deployment, was something a little different. If it was something like, how can we create a transition plan to immediately begin reducing emissions on our streets and maybe lead to a 90% reduction in our emissions from our fleet. There was I think this was slightly before my time on the board, but there's no policy that says we're moving to a 100% zero emissions fleet or anything like that. So how did that become the question? Because I think if the question was slightly different, maybe we'd be making different technologies would sort of rise to the top.
So there's actually a lot there. I'm going to try to unpack. So in terms of how we got to this point, it really is sort of the compounding ramifications of all the executive limitations. I can't be imprudent. I can't create unfunded long-term obligations. I can't create debt without working with you guys. I can't put us back in the financial ditch. I have to provide recommendations in a strategic multi-year context. All of those things together brought us to the conclusion we're looking at, and I should also add, avoiding waste. And that's, and you could call it throwaway costs, avoiding, we went down this one, it didn't work. So all that cost is effectively thrown away. Trying to avoid that, I think, is part of the overall prudence of the 2.0. There's a lot of interpretations in there. I want to be clear. There's a lot of professional judgment. A lot of that, is not spoken directly in your policies. But that is kind of what led us to We're looking for a long-term solution for full deployment for the larger fleet that we know we're going to have 10, 20 years from now. So that's hopefully the context to that. Your other question about if the board's direction were slightly different, I think raises the question of urgency. How urgent is it? How fast do we start? And I tried to allude to that earlier. Yes, that I think would make a difference in sort of the degree of risk that I assume you want me to take on as part of these discussions. So we'd have to talk more about what you as a body would want to use in that direction. But I do want to make an observation, something I've noticed through this process, if I may, because I think it says something about the degree of urgency people bring to this. And it speaks to how sincerely people do believe, I think, both sides of this. I've noticed a distinction in all that, all those graphs I showed you that was kind of confusing. There seem to be two broad directions that people are approaching these questions on. There are folks like myself who are approaching this from the bottom up, shall I say, in terms of what is the technology capable of doing today, and what is it reasonably capable of doing in the future? That is just one way to look at it. It's a way of framing a question. It has its own limitations and biases. I want to be clear about that. The other way I've seen, which really hit me when I was reading an International Energy Agency report on this, they came at this question very differently, and I think equally valid. They did not like hydrogen, so that got my interest. I'm like, hey, I should understand why. They came at it from, we're trying to prevent 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by, I think, 2050, I think was their number. I don't remember explicitly. To do that, they then reverse engineered emissions that would need to be cut. And I think they made assumptions about what different technologies could do, and they came to a different conclusion. They said hydrogen isn't going to work in that time frame based on that target that we have, so we prefer electrification. And that sort of, to me, was the top-down approach to it. I was surprised in their report there was no discussion of the things that I put to the front about operational readiness, the impact on the operations of it. But I want to say they're both equally valid. And there's a question about urgency, priorities, values, what goes into it. And certainly if the board changes its direction to me about your degree of urgency, yes, that would change, how I might approach the conversation.
Simi, did you have any follow-up? Are you fine? Jesse, did you get a chance to speak already? Can I let other people have a chance first? So Mike?
Thank you, Matt, for providing all this additional information to us. It's very interesting, it's challenging, and I think we're making good progress. One of the key new things that you've provided to us this time is these decision considerations that you put in a framework of our policies. And that's a very interesting and useful way of looking at that. In all of these charts with your filling in the half circles or quarter circles or full circles, it is certainly useful. Couple of things, though, that I think it lacks. Number one, anybody who doesn't understand our policy governance and our policies, this isn't going to mean anything to them, I'm afraid. And we have a lot of stakeholders that I hope are very interested in the decision we are making. And I hope we hear more from them than we have already. A couple of other things regarding that. There was no, to me, just seeing these circles being filled in the words next to them is just basically a statement of what's being ranked. It doesn't mean some of these I think I can understand. Others, I have no idea why you are ranking certain ones with a half a circle versus a full circle, all of that. That to me was one thing that was really missing from it. Another thing that I thought would be more helpful too is there's no indication of what's more important. They're just a big, long list, I think like 21 policies. And gee, there they are, there's all those circles and things like that. Which are the real most important ones? That, to me, was missing too. And I'd like to take one of your slides that you presented to us today, and that's the one that's called Recap Hydrogen Project, that leads off with policy 2.0, which has to do with imprudence, i.e. risk. And you said the overall potential risk for battery is a full circle, hydrogen only a half circle. And you made the comment that there's more hurdles for batteries to overcome than for hydrogen to overcome. I would just think it would be the opposite. That one in particular, I'd like to hear what those hurdles are and why they're more steep for battery versus hydrogen. And you don't have to answer that now if you would
I'll take a
rather
swing
do
at
that
it.
later. Pardon?
I'll take a swing.
Okay, good.
So thank you for the feedback on the tool. We'd never attempted to monitor a specific decision like this. It is frustratingly simplified, I'm sure. And if any of you have questions about why it was ranked in one way and not another, please let me know. And we did discuss as staff, and I got some good feedback, and we tweaked it a couple times before it was published. Pertaining to 2.0, this is the parent policy of all the other executive limitations. It says don't do anything unlawful, unethical, imprudent. So none of this is unlawful. None of this is unethical, in my opinion. This is just a decision about what type of screwdriver do we want to buy. That's what we're dealing with. So really it came down to prudence. So I Googled prudence. What exactly does that mean? And it came back to meaning reckless or imprudent, rather. It was reckless or heedless of the risks, ramifications of a decision. So with that in mind, 2.0 is ranked the way it is because of all the other 2.0 policies that we looked at before, the financial ones, the asset management, the staff, and the others. Really what it comes down to, the hurdles, the number of things that have to be dealt with for batteries to be successful. So both of them face uncertainty about the price of the energy. I know right now electricity is perceived as cheaper than hydrogen, and it is. That could change if a hub opens up 11 miles away at the American Center for Mobility. Kind of hard to gauge that one. The emissions from the generation, also kind of a wild card. We've discussed that. Let's take fire risk. For the hydrogen does not have an inherent, it burns worse problem. So even if the battery buses, the energy density got better and the range was no longer a problem, and I've said before that that would be a breakthrough thing that could change our calculus. If those buses could go out, stay out longer, we could avoid the inefficiency inherent in hydrogen production, that would be a great thing. But then batteries have the extra hurdle of, well, what about the fire risk? Because you need a better battery that not just has better energy density, but also how do we deal with the fire risk? Hydrogen does not have the same risk to it. So you have a compounded technology requirement. Hydrogen has its own hurdles, but they tend to be more markets, economics. Will it be cheap? Will it be green? But you don't rely on some of those challenges. I hope that makes sense as a partial answer of what the additional hurdles partially look like.
Partially, yes.
Okay. I'm happy to try to answer it more a little bit later.
Also, along the lines of showing how the advantages and disadvantages go, hydrogen versus batteries. To me, I thought another way might be useful. and that it would be to basically have a chart that shows the pluses and minuses of hydrogen versus batteries. And I would put them into broader categories and fewer categories, and try to rank them in terms of what you saw were the most important. And for example, just taking what I might put on this chart. So what are some of the pluses of hydrogen versus batteries? Well, certainly range, we've talked about that a lot. That's very clear. Another thing is the ability to scale. You've brought that up and made a very good point there. And there's certainly others. Minuses, to me, they may be different from yours. One that bothers me the most is the uncertainty about hydrogen, its availability, and its cost to us. I mean, that's really way out there. And I think, even though we certainly can't predict what the cost of electricity will be in the future, I think we can get that in a more narrow band than we can hydrogen. And there's certainly some uncertainty regarding the availability of electricity, particularly we get further out, and others are tapping into more electricity. But there's got to be more uncertainty about the availability of hydrogen and the cost of hydrogen. Another negative might be the fact that really the transportation industry has had more experience with batteries than they have with hydrogen. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Anyway, this is kind of how I think might be a useful way to look at it, along with maybe with a brief explanation of each of the ratings along those lines.
Do we have any other people who have not had an opportunity? Chris?
Yeah, I'll just make it quick, being one of the last people to speak on the board. Certainly appreciate all the intelligent people on this board and the thoughtful comments. It sure seems to me, just as I read the news and drive around, the proliferation of EV technology. You can't miss all the charge point stations being built, all the Tesla superchargers being built, and not just them being built, but the technology being improved upon. Just within the past 3 years, I think Tesla's gone from the version 1 supercharger to V2 to V3 to V4, which now charges at over 1,000 miles per hour. I think just yesterday, Mercedes announced that they're installing their first of thousands of EVs, which charge at 400 kilowatts, which is faster than batteries can even take on the energy right now. And so you see ranges starting to increase 10% year over year, kind of. It sure seems like the market has kind of decided which way it wants to go. And I agree that this initial capital outlays is very significant. I new on the board and have heard about the struggles of Yonder, 5 years ago or 10 years ago or however many years ago. And I just, think to myself, wow, I really don't want to be on the board to see anything like that happen ever again. And if we're talking about, reduction of greenhouse gases, I think we could probably make an immediate impact if we were to spend a smaller amount focusing on other areas besides 2 buses in the near term. And then just one final thought, I think we've, as you mentioned, working with the U of M team, I think we've kind of got a case study being paid for us just down the road and their experiment with the buses. So I would lean on their experience and learn as much as we can from that as well. So.
All right, Jesse?
Thank you, and thank you to the board for giving me the opportunity to speak again. So kind of going back to my my initial question about the differentiating the costs of the pilot versus the long-term costs. My I think, I mean, I do tend to agree with you, with your proposal that in the long term, hydrogen fuel cells seem to show more promise. I see a lot of issues with battery buses, both all in, in their current state and long term. Something that, hasn't been brought up is the increased weight. I recall when the new Ypsilanti Library was built and buses started running out there, bus ended up destroying the driveway because it hadn't been built to handle the weight. And if we are going to be increasing, well, and also I actually witnessed a bus on North University. It looked like the ground turned to liquid under it. The tires just sank right into the old asphalt. And now we're talking about, increasing the weight of the buses pretty substantially is going to have a much higher impact on a lot of our infrastructure. But really, what it's kind of coming down to for me is like that what we do is we run a service to the community. And I really appreciate that what, the board is talking about, wanting to reduce carbon emissions. That us reducing our carbon emissions is not a good in of itself. It's, how it benefits the entire area. I don't know if if the text can maybe do this. I just tried sharing my screen. I was wondering if that might be something that you all could put on there. Thank you. So I was looking back at the long range plan. I was really happy to have voted for this. And one of the things that we did right here was the long range plan talked about a 7 to 11% reduction in transportation related emissions. And that was not with maybe was including, I don't know if you can dig back into that. Did that, whether or not that included the zero emission buses and what percentage of that reduction could be due to our own propulsion?
That's mainly for ridership. I mean, shifting mode share from single occupancy vehicle to transit.
Okay. So our long range plan is going to do 20 times, contribute 20 times, I don't know what you want to call it, 2,000% higher reduction in carbon emissions than us transitioning to a carbon neutral fleet. Like there's no comparison. And in addition to that, we have everything else on this page. The increase the levels of service expected by every rider, particularly by those in low and very low opportunity index areas. And then I was looking down on so 6.9 million car trips avoided as part of our long range plan. And then I was looking down here. Our goals were more equitable. Like we did have a healthier environment, but a lot of that, what we can do to contribute to a healthier environment is providing alternatives to cars. And that's not just for the environment's sake, that's also for the social equity stake, that yes, maybe you could achieve this, and I actually in fact know that experts don't believe that you can achieve carbon neutrality just with electrification, that they also, even the best estimates also involve mode share to reach our climate goals. But this seems like a very high cost for very low investment, or excuse me, for very low return on all of our goals. If our goals are to decrease the area's carbon footprint, we will do more by investing that money in our long-range plan than in focusing on decarbonizing the fleet. Not saying, again, that we shouldn't decarbonize the fleet. I think that is important, and I'm looking forward to a day when fossil fuels are not viable, are just out of the question. But to me, that is a larger societal project, and our role in combating climate change is mode shift. If there is a risk to the agency of not doing a pilot, I think, maybe for our next, the question that I'm going to want answered for our next meeting is, what is the risk of not doing a pilot, of not investing this money? Because I'm sorry, I lost that thought, but I guess I'll say that's right now the question on my mind, is that we invested a lot of energy. We did phone surveys. We worked for years determining what the community wanted us to do. And the long range plan was it. And I am really nervous, and just really, it doesn't seem worth taking away the resources from the things that we promised we were going to do. We literally just went to the voters with a service-based millage hike last year. And our next major topic of conversation was spending money on something that was not part of that millage. Well, no, sorry. I took it back. That was in the millage. It was in the capital, part of the capital plan. But it was one item out of many, and that's not really the one that, when I was out there campaigning for it, that's not what anyone was asking me about. No one was asking me about zero emission buses. They were asking me, when can I get late night service from Park Ridge? When can we start running the buses later? When can we start getting buses more often on the weekends? So that's really what I want to focus on. Thank you.
I do have a couple of questions, but first I want to thank the board for all of their very intriguing and really heartfelt questions and thoughts around this. It's obvious to me that you are all really thinking about this very hard, and that the public should look to you and understand what a great job you're doing. So I just want to thank you for all the work that's been put in, and also to staff and to Matt. A couple of things happened tonight that I wanted to go back to. Susan asked about if the grant is not successful, could we just turn around and sell those buses? And it's my understanding that, like, our current contracts, the way that we receive our money from the FTA, is our buses basically have to be there for 12 years. Have there been a change in the grant? So let's say we do invest in whatever propulsion and we find that it's not successful. Would we then have an opportunity to look at, or would we be saddled with those buses for a period of time because of the requirements of the grant from the FTA?
And I'll go to an assist with Dina if I get this wrong. My broad understanding is that we probably could sell them. It would basically boil down to transferring the asset to another transit agency so that the federal investment is still realized. They didn't lose their money. They don't care exactly where the bus is. Can it be done? Yes, that does, I think, to her earlier point, and I didn't mean to suggest the pilot was like, you're stuck with this forever. If I did, I apologize. Yeah, there are ways, if it doesn't work, to divest ourselves of the assets at that point. Particularly, again, it would be nice if it's not a big investment. It's very easy to move to block that back. Is that roughly, what would you add, Dina?
Yeah, I would just add that that's always a possibility. It's a little tricky, and it would be we would lose money. We're not going to recover fully what we paid for the buses. We have buses customized to fit our needs. They would not be exactly what some other agency would want. I know we're all understanding that when you buy a new vehicle and you drive it off the lot, it pretty much depreciates very quickly. So any costs that were not recoverable would ultimately be the responsibility of our agency. So there'd be some loss, to be honest.
Okay. Another thought I had was, when we were talking about long-term risks, when I think about electrification, one of the long-term risks for me is, if we went electric, then we would most definitely have to upgrade our garage. And then that sort of that money and the funding and the grant and, how long that process would be, that also seems like a big piece of concern. And then the final question, the final thing I wanted to ask is, it's really cool that you put in this graph about the agency out in California that's gone 100%. And I'm wondering where are they located geographically in terms of weather? Because our weather patterns are, we get very cold, and we don't get very hot like Texas, but we still have warm days. But we have to deal with the cold weather, and that puts a drain on batteries, hence why we would need to have possibly 2 buses to handle the capacity of a current bus. And then that would speak to, what I want to find out is watching them, does that benefit us? In terms of, is their climate similar to ours? Would we get a lot more information understanding what they go through as an agency with their current weather situation?
So if I might, I believe Antelope Valley is outside LA. So we can certainly look more into that. They're slightly smaller fleet than us, but well within sort of our peer group. We're happy to look into that and get a little more information. I do know their board made it a policy priority. Urgency was an issue for them, so they made this decision several years back. We're happy to do that. What was your second? After the selling, you had a second question.
Garage.
Garage, thank you. Either technology will require significant modifications to the garage facility. For the questions of hydrogen, because hydrogen gas is light, it rises quickly. If there's a leak in the garage, it'll go to the ceiling. If the gas concentrates, it can become very flammable very fast. So you need special ventilation, and you also have to harden up your electrical stuff so that there's no switches that are creating sparks. That's not cheap. For batteries, ripping out all the wiring, which is vintage 1984. I've seen some of the circuit breakers, they're that old. There's a lot of work to be done there, hanging the overhead charging stations or installing the ground-based charging stations, and then whatever fire suppression we think it would actually work. In my mind, both of those, I want to say they cancel each other out. The costs they're not an even Steven kind of match, but in my mind, in this broad calculus, we can kind of set the facility modifications aside for either and accept that's going to be expensive no matter what we do. It's going to have to be grant funded. It'll be disruptive for operations as all this stuff is occurring. You get that either way. There's no way to avoid it.
So in my mind, I was thinking that if we needed more, our bus bay is at capacity, it holds 103. And if we need more significant buses, electric buses, to be able to run our routes, then we've extended capacity, where it's my understanding that hydrogen buses is sort of bus for bus. So we wouldn't necessarily have to extend the capacity of a garage. So I'm thinking about long-term, if we went electric, we would then have to think about, how do we house these? Where do we house these? Would it mean a new garage? Would it mean sharing a facility with another agency that may be going the same route? I'm wondering if there's been any prognostication in that area.
Sure. So first I want to sort of clarify about the range anxiety and how that exactly manifests. It kind of gets back to something Simi asked. Is it a 1-for-1? In terms of the uptime of the bus with hydrogen, it's close enough not to matter. With battery, it looks like you need 1.4 electric buses, somewhere between 1.4 and 2, to match what a diesel bus can do today with today's technology. Our bus assignments don't require the full range of the bus every day. And Simi's asked me some good questions about, are there bus assignments, not routes, but bus assignments, that we could put the battery buses on, and it would be effectively be a 1-for-1? And the answer is yes. The challenge comes in on the fleet management side, is that those buses are not assigned. We don't assign buses to routes. They're rotating through the shop and back in service. They show up in line. The driver just takes the first one. That's about the economies of scale and efficiencies of managing a completely interchangeable standardized bus fleet. When we begin to get away from that, now we have to worry about, okay, the driver can't take the very first bus because that's an electric, and this particular bus assignment he'll run out of juice. So we got to pull that bus forward, snake the bus right behind it out, and then go out. Oh, now he's late. That's where things start to operationally become challenging. Could we do it? Yes, some agencies have done it. I think I mentioned to you, it was Reno, Nevada, as an example of someone we spoke to, I think in a conference in Florida just recently, where they have done that. They did that approach. So you can do that until you kind of hit the wall of the range anxiety, where suddenly the battery buses no longer can't be used for those higher distance fleets, or runs, excuse me. At that point, expanding your battery fleet becomes self-defeating with today's technology. At that point, now Reno is having to buy, I think they said hybrid diesel electrics for now, while they transition to hydrogen for those longer distance ones. This is where the hidden costs of duplication of the propulsion system comes in. Now they're going to be operating initially with 3 until they phase out the diesels, then with 2 propulsion systems. Eventually, that creates duplicative costs. They're going to have to standardize eventually. If battery creeps up and can do the longer routes, easy peasy. They'll do that. If it can't, they're going to have to phase out the battery and phase up the hydrogen. But in the meantime, they'll be running with 2 sets of systems for however long it takes. And that duplicates training for the mechanics. That duplicates the amount of parts, in some cases, they have to store in there. It leads to the potential for error. Oops, I took the wrong bus out. I don't want to overplay this, but in the morning, we got a bit of a scramble every day in the operations group to make sure that every bus goes out on time. And drivers are coming in just a few minutes before they got to take that bus out. They show up, they do their walk around, the bus starts, good, out we go. Things that create challenges for that, yes, we can, our operational practices can evolve. And to a degree, we're willing to do that and sort of eat the costs. We think hydrogen, for example, we're going to need to up the size of our fueling crew because they take longer to charge. But that one doesn't affect customer service, and the budget impact for the fueling crew is relatively modest. So that's a reasonable thing to do. The batteries create so much complexity and affect the fleet management issues to such a degree that it gives us pause and concern about our ability to manage it. For example, and this is back to the hurdles, we don't worry about charging management or taking care of batteries right now. We don't. We don't have enough of them to care. When a bus pulls in and it needs to be fueled, a guy pulls it up to a diesel pump, just like you do at the gas station, fills it up. Takes a few minutes, bus pulls around, it's in line, it's ready to go. Hydrogen takes a little longer, but it's roughly the same. It's easy for us to see how we can train staff to make that change. Okay. With batteries, well, you can't do it in middle of the day, because that's peak charging pricing, so you got to do it overnight. But there's actually people selling software just to help you manage which battery's been charged, how much has it been charged. You can't charge it fully. You have to charge it to like 80% when it goes out, because you don't want to overcharge the battery. You also don't want to run it down too far. It can be done. These skills can be learned. I want to be clear, if that's the direction that we as an agency, that you as a board want us to go, we will learn that. But it's not a skill set we have today. We'll have to bring that in-house. We'll have to figure out how to do that and figure out how to make it work. But it's a complication we just don't have today. So that's an example of the hurdle. You also made a comment about, or Jesse made a comment about the weight. And I did send another document around to you that does specify there, some concerns about the hydraulic hoists in the shop and how heavy a bus they can pick up. There's there is some concern right there that batteries are very heavy and it's pushing up against the limit of what those things are designed for. That's a very expensive hidden cost to sort of discover accidentally after you've made the decision. So I think we need to nail that one down in terms of will it work or not.
Thank you. Just in case, Rich, go ahead.
Just two quick questions. So if I understand correctly, always do this. Two quick questions. If I understood correctly, if we apply, being awarded the grant is not a given. And the other part then to that, is like, what are the short and long-term side effects that we would face if we're not to apply for the grant versus not being awarded the grants? So I know it's beyond just
Yes.
like implementation. There's other factors I think
Yes.
at play.
Sure, so I'll do my best. So yes, if we apply, we may not win. I want to be clear, if you authorize me, I will swing for the fences. We're in it to win. We're not in it to come in second. So that's what we'll be trying to do. The implications of not proceeding at all, I think was the second question. You know, transportation has been identified along with, I think, heavy industry as one of the hard to decarbonize sectors, in part because these issues are so salient here. And you had asked, I think, an earlier question about why do this? And I'm going to try to answer why do this and what are the implications of not doing this at the same time. And I'm also going to sort of, be frank, I believe we should. And for what it's worth as your CEO, I think we should proceed. I think there is a moral imperative, if you will, if I step a little out of my role in terms of making value judgments. I do think this is a societal issue, and that relates to the risks of not doing anything, the risks of being seen by the public and our elected leaders of perhaps not doing anything or not moving fast enough or not taking it seriously. Yes, there are other things we could do instead in the meantime. I don't know if they're as impactful or as symbolically significant as the buses. We are a bus company, is what we do. Electrifying some minivans, should we do it? I believe we should. I believe we will. I just don't know if that's going to have the kind of punch we need. So I do think not proceeding carries the risk of falling a little out of phase with what the public expects. That goes into ownership linkage and questions there that, a little outside my lane, so I don't want to go too far down that road. There's also risks to grant applications, and this is where it doubles back into the long-range plan that I know Jesse just spoke about. So the long-range plan requires us to build a new garage, not because we like garages, but because we want to increase the frequency of bus service, and our current garage is full. So we need space for more buses, we need more garage. The grant that we need from the FTA to do that is called Bus and Bus Facilities. It's number 5339. We are now not allowed to apply for that unless you've approved a zero emissions bus transition plan. That decision was made on Capitol Hill. I found out about it long after it was made. It's a politically driven decision. They're trying to encourage us as federal money recipients to move in this direction. There's definitely political pressure coming from the federal level. I would suspect there's probably political pressure heading towards us from the state level. So to finish off, we will not be able to make a whole lot of progress on the long-range plan because the grants we need will not be available to us unless we start to move in this direction. Now, the transition plan is not a firm commitment by a certain date. We got to give a soft commitment with general outlines of what we're intending to do. At a state level, and just again, on the point of falling out of phase with the political zeitgeist, if you will, the legislature said to DTE and Consumers Energy, you need to be 100% clean by 2040. Now they're grumbling, more than grumbling about that, and raising the specter of significantly higher electricity prices, and how much of that is just sour grapes versus how much of that is true. I can't say, I'm not an expert in that field, but certainly the state government cares about this. At a local level, I think we have more of a mixed bag. We have certainly some jurisdictions that care a great deal, and some elected officials who care a great deal. Others who've signaled to us in the past, this is not their top priority. Nevertheless, I think we're kind of getting surrounded. The ultimate checkmate on this point is plausible now, and that's a mandate. California has a mandate for transit agencies to go zero emissions with their bus fleet, not their van fleet, not their facilities, their bus fleets. We don't have that in Michigan yet, but I can't say that, you know, this legislature has done things I've never seen them do in quite a few years. And the Biden administration is swinging for the fences on this point in ways that I'm not used to seeing. So I think the risks of not proceeding, first, falling out of phase with, you know, political leaders, but also the public. Not everybody in the public, but certainly a lot of people in the public. Not being able to apply for grants, which is directly affects our ability to increase mode share. So we're kind of, you know, cart, horse, rock, hard place, whatever the analogy you want to do is. And a much lesser concern, but it kind of gets back to your point about why would I bring this up to you if it's so bloody confusing and difficult. You've given me policies that say I need to advance your ends, comply with your executive limitations. I'm here in my role as CEO to try to do that. This is the biggest bang for the buck. Is it risk-free? No. I also want to be clear with you, if we defer this decision and come back in, you know, 3 years, and that might be the longest we could wait before that grant becomes a real problem. Or it might be a problem right now. Even if we came back, I don't know that the crystal ball is going to be any clearer. I can't promise you 3 years from now that all these problems would be resolved. I do believe that we should move forward. That's just in my opinion. But in whatever direction the board is comfortable with and to whatever degree you're comfortable with, that's what's important.
Thank you. Mike, oh, and then Susan.
From the very first time that we started talking about zero emission buses and you explained to us battery electric and fuel cell electric, you know, my head just started spinning about thinking about the future because there's so much uncertainty on both of these technologies. We know that both of them are advancing. We know that things will be very different in the future, and we don't know what the future is going to be. There's risk. That just keeps floating around in my head. And how do we minimize risk and do the right thing? And yesterday, when I was going through the board package, I made notes about things that I was going to bring up today. The very first thing I put on there, you know, how do we lower that risk? And then right first thing after that was, what if we just delay it? We will know more a year from now than we know today. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Certainly things won't all be solved, but we will know more, and I think the risk will be less in maybe 2 years too, but maybe we could just take this a year at a time, because we will know more in a year. Now, I didn't get with Rich or with Jesse ahead of time, but they both kind of bringing this up in a different way. Will we really suffer by delaying, let's say, I'll just take a number, a year? And maybe that's the best way to do it. We don't have to move today. We will know more in the future. I don't know how much more we will know. We will always have unknowns and things that we have to project into the future, but it's got to be less tomorrow than it is today. And it just makes me think, you know, what would happen if we just delay a year?
One thing, in addition to what I've said in responding earlier about falling out of phase with expectations, Something I didn't mention, your comment about in a year triggered me. We have a federal election coming up. The grant programs that are available to us now are 80 cents on the dollar on capital. That's really good historically. In terms of just pure get some money, that's a good deal. Usually we're at like 50-50. So the Biden administration is making this very attractive. That's why so many people are throwing their hats in the ring. What'll change in a year? That. And will it change? I don't know. I don't pretend to say I have any ability to forecast that. We know the federal deficit is increasing. We know the feds can't go on piling on debt forever. At some point, the spigots will have to shut off. I don't know when that'll occur. Will there be a different administration that wants to be more cost conscious and this is not their priority? I couldn't say, but your question about what'll happen in a year, that's one thing. Just in the next, 24 months or 12 months, excuse me, that would, 13 months, that will test that question that I hadn't mentioned before.
Susan.
I just think a lot of the comments I'm hearing from my colleagues speaks to the importance of the question I raised following some other comments about having a plan for the non-bus fleet. I think emphasizes our commitment as an organization. And so we're concerned about the loss of potential resources for the riding public, and we don't want that to happen, but we do want to demonstrate our commitment. I think that's a piece of the puzzle, is our commitment as demonstrated through that fleet transition. So whatever that plan looks like, I'd like to see it at the time we were being asked to make a decision. That said, I've got two questions, and they both relate to the problems with electric buses. The first question goes back to what Chris was mentioning about as this technology, as battery cars are more and more in use, we're seeing also the high-speed chargers getting better and better and better. And so one of the concerns about electric was that it's going to take all night for this thing to charge, and even still, it may not be fully charged. I'd like to have information, if it's available, on what the chargers are looking like and how they're changing. Are they as slow as they are today? If the technology in the private sector is incentivizing people to make the shift to electric by not only making more chargers available, but also by making high-speed chargers available, I'd love to know what that exists for the big vehicles. How much quicker are these chargers than they once were? And where is that going? I think that's a really important point as part of what Chris mentioned. And the second thing was a question that relates to the fire. I've lived in Michigan since '83. I've never had a garage, so I don't understand, do all buses, are they that fragile they have to be housed in a garage? You're speaking about two buses that'll now be temporarily stationed near the dumpster. Are they so precious they have to be inside all night long lest the frost hit them? Could they live outside? I don't understand what that issue is about the garage. We need more garage space. Certainly the mechanics need their area to work. Certainly there needs to be resources for them available as they're fixing them. But I look at the fleet of airplanes that Delta runs, and there's a hangar near where they are stationed, and it's big enough for maybe a couple planes to get fixed. But the majority of planes live outside. I'd love to have more information on the garage. It seems like a confining element in this. What is the problem that we're solving? And if they don't need to live inside, they may need to be fixed, they may need to be dealt with at some point inside so the mechanics are not out and exposed. But can't the buses be living out in a parking lot? So I'd love that to be answered again, because those are two constraining elements arguing against electric. Thank you.
Sure. And if I might,
of course,
a couple of quick responses. We'll certainly look into the latest on fast charging developments for the industrial scale applications. These are not, plugging in your personal car. These are heavy duty industrial scale things. But Chris's broader point about, the market's moving in that direction, development. Yeah, I think he also made a good point about the battery's capacity to take the charge. There's sort of 2 points of that, but I'm happy to bring back more information. We'll look at that and just see what the latest is on that. In terms of why is the garage important? Are the buses fragile? It has to do with, as a scheduled transportation service, reliability of the fleet management is very important. Are the buses fragile? No, but some of them are old. If they're very cold, will they start on time when we need them? Frankly, as the older they get, the less reliable they become. The primary reason all transit agencies in cold climates store their buses inside has to do with starting them up in the morning and getting them ready for customers. When a bus has been outside in sub-freezing temperatures, the passenger compartment is that same temperature. Heating that passenger compartment, defrosting the windows, takes a long time. Running the bus will consume electricity or diesel or hydrogen or whatever it'll take to heat the passenger compartment up. It's a huge volume of air. It heats very slowly. Generally speaking, we keep them in the garage to keep them at a moderate level of temperature so that the mechanical components will start reliably in the morning and we don't have a pullout problem, we don't miss service, but also so that it's comfortable for the passengers in cold weather. In California, I do believe, and in some other southern states, they do store buses outside because the cold is not as much of a concern. But I think in Texas, they put them under solar panels so that they don't heat up because all that glass makes it a solar oven, right? Same issue, different side of the temperature gradient. So that's why we store them inside. It's not just for the mechanics, it's to control the asset so that it's available when we need it in the condition our customers come to expect it in. Can they be stored outside? Yes, you can modify certain buses. The comparison with planes, I don't know. I don't know planes. Dina knows planes better than I do. I would imagine they're just so big, they're built to be stored outside. They don't have quite the same issues. I don't think they leak air, frankly, as badly as the buses do. That's my guess. That's my guess. You can build buses to be stored outside. I've seen highway coaches done it. You build an auxiliary heater in it. They used to be called Wabastos. They were, was it kerosene, gasoline driven? Kerosene and diesel driven. They're not regulated the way EPA 2010 heavy duty engines are, so they actually are much more polluting in some respects. And where was Webasto based? They have a couple of different spots, but one of their major production units is in Poland. So supply lines have been dodgy. I have never seen urban transit buses in a cold climate stored outside because of these issues. I hope that is at least a partial answer to that question.
Absolutely.
But we'll certainly look into the charging speed.
I couldn't even imagine having to clean the snow off of those.
Oh, yeah, I
buses.
forgot about that, yeah. If you don't
Yes,
mind.
of course, please, Troy.
So just to answer your question, lithium-ion batteries won't take charge below 32 degrees. Cells themselves won't charge. The charger will connect and it will start feeding the battery will start charging above 40 degrees, but your charging time frame are just ridiculously long until the battery reaches approximately 70 degrees. Once it's 70 degrees, high-speed charger for a 686 kilowatt, which is one of the major large capacity bus batteries out there, is about 4 hours. And that is a huge amount of electricity happening at once, generally pumping in per night anywhere between 2 and 6 megawatts of electricity between a 4-hour time period. Would we have to keep the garage at 70 degrees overnight? Not with electric. We would be able to keep it above 40. It'd just take longer to charge. Which right now we are set above 45 degrees. It's 45 hits, the heater's sticking in the garage and automatically space heat on where you're at. So.
Lots of good questions. Any further questions or comments? Oh, sorry, Simi, hi.
Quickly respond to a couple of questions. Thanks. I appreciate what's been brought up around the return on investment around these buses, and I think it's a very important conversation. And mode shift obviously having the potential for big environmental benefits, and that should be a priority to get more and more people riding our buses. I think where I want to push back is what I think I heard was around the majority of our responsibility should be in environmental responsibility being in promoting mode shift. And I think, we've got an environmental impact of our agency, just like people have environmental impacts of their daily lives. And, it's my opinion that it's our responsibility to address those footprints as best we can if we have the resources to do so. And that as the city of Ann Arbor's made commitments, universities made commitments. If we don't make a commitment, that 0.5% of community-wide emissions is going to grow. If everybody else makes reductions and we don't, then that 0.5 becomes a larger number, and we've got to think about whether we're okay with that. And I'm not. And I think the executive limitation related to sustainability that we passed, talks about the impact of the organization, and we should keep that in mind. The only other thing is I think the 0.5%, Jesse, I'm glad you pulled up the long range plan, but I think the 0.5% to 11% wasn't quite an apples to apples comparison, because the figure in the long range plan was only transportation related emissions, whereas the 0.5% is community wide as a whole. So that was more like 11% of transportation related emissions, which are only about a quarter. So just don't want that to snowball. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll close this out. Thank you very much, Mr. Carpenter and Troy. Did you have anything you wanted to add before you go?
Thank you. This is a very good conversation. I think you've opened the door for a couple of other directions. Staff and I are going to continue to proceed. We're going to respond to the questions you've raised tonight. Again, we'll try either piecemealing it out by email or in your board packets and through these discussions. I am cognizant of time. I've already got staff. We're already meeting kind of, I think every other week, war room style on grant preparation and what can we do ahead of your final decision. January is coming up. We will look to you for your guidance and direction on this. This is a good conversation. I think you guys you see all the different sides of it. You are asking the right questions, and I really appreciate that. We will be ready next month, and we'll help you advance the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. We'll give Matt a minute to get to his seat because he's in the hot seat again. All right, next on our agenda is the CEO report. Surprise.
Nothing to report. No, I wish. I actually, in addition to what's in your written package, I would like to ask Forrest to provide some additional insight or updates. There's been a lot going on in our public planning over the last week. Forrest.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. As you all know, we've been doing public engagement for the detailed millage plan. We have a detailed maps, schedules available for public. Thanks to some board members, namely Kathleen and Jesse, and attended one of our virtual meetings and actually provided some feedback and asked some questions. So thanks for your participation and support. So far, we've done 5 public meetings, 3 in person, 2 online. Also receiving emails, comments from the website, social media. I think in total, roughly over 300 interactions with public, so which is good. We just finished today at YTC, the last in-person meeting. Of course, the public comment period still have 1 week to go. So general public riders will have the opportunity to give us email, their feedback through email, phone number, or even writing a letter. And then after that, we're going to incorporate, review all those detailed comments and incorporate the feedback into the final plan. We're, planning to have the final schedules maps by early spring. And to be ready for August 2024. Of course, the express bus still scheduled for April 2024. George may, drivers, buses, right? So of course, George's division is working really hard to try to hire operators and getting buses ready for this millage plan. So that's for the millage plan, and 1 week to go. If you have additional comments yourself or the people just encourage them to submit their comments for next week. So another project, Ypsilanti Trans Center, I think it's being mentioned a few times tonight as well. Of course, this is a capital project we're working on, and we got some funding. Last month, you got a report finally, we hired the consultants team, which is DLZ and the HDR. So they're working on, just started the process in October. This week, they were on site for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, actually last 3 days. So did a lot of staff engagement, mostly understand the needs, the issues, and the current condition. To verify, we already done a study back in 2018, but it just as a first step to verify what was in that study. And we also talked to city planners, and mostly at the administration level, understand their needs, their priorities. And they got quite a bit of feedback. And they even made a comment because they had experience working with different agencies. So they consider us as a very, very engaged organization. So they got a lot of good feedback. So that's just the start of the project. I think from time to time, we're going to bring a project update to the board, making sure you're in the loop. And then, of course, next step, we'll probably start to do, and mostly this is an environmental work. We have to go through the federal process and making sure we meet all the requirements. But of course, there is going to be community engagement, hopefully in the spring. And then there will be more engagement. And the study is going to last for about a year. So we have to conclude the environmental work by October-ish and November next year. But during this time, there is multiple opportunities for board, for community to provide feedback. That's it.
Excellent.
Any questions? Okay.
And I'll add a few other things that are sort of very emergent that I think are very important and promising. So the University of Michigan, just I think with our last board meeting about that same time, released for public comment their campus master plan, U of M 2050. We had a very good conversation with their planning group, former board member Sugat among them. And really, I didn't understand quite how important this is and how many years in the making it's been. So I think they've been engaged in much more sort of internal dialogue and discussion quietly than I certainly realized. But they've, their proposals are out. They're interested in moving forward. And transit is a much higher priority based on some of the things they've said. So I'm cautiously optimistic that one of our largest partners here in the area may be eager to look for more opportunities to work with us on a number of fronts. So we have a good, long-standing relationship with the university. We surely will continue to have that. And Forrest and I have a meeting set up after Thanksgiving to really sit down and put their plan and our plan next together and see where the overlap and commonalities are and what we can make common cause on. One of the items on there was bus lanes, which then very interesting at the Transportation Commission, City of Ann Arbor Transportation Commission, I was asked by Molly Kleinman yesterday, I'd really like you guys to start forward talking about bus lanes. When are you going to do that? And I said, funny, you should mention that. because I wanted to bring that up tonight anyway. So at the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission, we see an opportunity, and we're sort of nudging the door open and see how far we can move in that direction. We see a lot of opportunity there. We see support in various parts of City Hall. This would be, it's very premature at this point. I don't want to get anyone's hopes too far up. This kind of thing, and what I mean by that is taking a lane away from cars or parking and dedicating it to mass transit. We've been doing it with bikes now for a little while, so it's possible, but it can be quite disruptive and politically not easy. Even if the cost is not high, the political capital can be considerable. So we're going to approach with caution, but with a certain amount of assertiveness into that space, and we're going to see how far that gets us. So I just wanted to let you know those discussions are starting to pop up. Don't be surprised if you hear about it.
Any questions for Matt on that? Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, it relates to that topic. Oops, knocking that over. We saw former council member Kirk Westfall come to our board meeting a few months ago, and he was urging our participation in the process as advocates for transit. And so as this relates to the Transportation Commission giving to the council recommendations that include transit priority features, I would love for our board to speak as advocates for transit. There really is a silence. I think the biking community has found a way to get together and speak either collectively or individually on their particular goals as bicyclists. I think the pedestrian community has begun to have a voice. Vision Zero, I think, is a good example of the impact. There's no one in this town that I'm aware of that are speaking as transit advocates, and if we are not those advocates, who would be? And if now is not the time, when would it be? So I don't know, this is where I get troubled by policy governance, that if we don't do it as a board, you can't do it. So it feels like a three-legged race that is almost impossible to win. Because I think as individuals, we could speak to this. And certainly I think people know that we serve on this board, but we also serve in our rest of our lives as advocates. I mean, I love the bus. I advocate it everywhere I go, but I feel encumbered that I can't speak without really bringing it to the board and what is our position as a board and how are we speaking to this. And that said, the fact that I don't know how to speak to it, where's the rest of us? I think all of us on this board have a role to play as advocates for transit, for our agency, but also for transit in our community. Prioritizing transit in the roadway seems an absolutely important thing to do, and now is that moment in time, and it shouldn't fall to staff. I think the voice of board members has more weight, the voice of individuals has more weight than staff have. So I'm kind of speaking because I'm confused under policy governance, what we're allowed to do, what we can't do, how much has to be a group process, how much we can speak as individuals. But we're at that moment of real change. And I think, again, this coming before us, the fact that the master plan speaks so much to connectivity, the university's plan, as I understand it, succeeds because all the campuses can connect together, and transit is the important piece in all of that. So the university, I think, would also want to be a part of that conversation about prioritizing transit. So I'm asking this collectively as board members, how do we play a role? How can we break free of kind of sitting silently on the sidelines? Where is our role in this? How free can we speak as individuals? And or is there something we can do as a board to advocate? Because this is really huge. I mean, we see the transit-oriented zoning going in, council approving on State Street. They're looking at Stadium, they're looking at Plymouth Road. That really only works if the transit service meets the needs of our riders. And again, I'm back to ridership. To get things out of the way so our buses can move smoothly, I think we need to change how that roadway is envisioned, how it's utilized. And it may be that it's only rush hour only, it may be that it's just during the school year. I mean, I don't know what it looks like, but I do know this is that moment where we should be speaking and advocating for buses. There is no one else advocating. And I don't think that staff have the kind of clout with their voice that we can have as community members to why this is that changing moment where transit should be prioritized. And how can we as a group of advocates lend our voice to council and others in support. So I raise it because I don't feel like I know exactly what I'm allowed to do. I don't know what we can do, but I do know we all should be doing something. I'll leave it there.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I actually have a really good response for that, and that is to ride the bus and go in not as a board member, but as a bus rider. That's what I do. And when I go into those meetings, I disclose that I am a board member, but that I don't speak for the board. And that's what's required from us under our bylaws, is that we not purport to speak from the board unless approved to do so. So I've been on, what do you call those, focus groups for the city of Ann Arbor relatively recently. I just said, hey, I mean, I'm here as a bus rider, but I am on the board, so, just so everything is above board. But having a vested interest in public transportation is, as you said, a really good selling point, and I think even a better selling point than being a board member. So in the words of a board member who, let's see, in the words of Larry Krieg, ride the bus.
And I think go ahead, Rich.
Can I go into a different question? Is that okay? So the staffing updates, I was just kind of curious, because we have quite a bit of plans to roll out a bunch of stuff in 2024. Does the team view that as a green, yellow, or red in regards to motor coach hiring?
George, you want to jump in? If you got a microphone over there. Oh, it's next to Troy.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It's a good question. We're ramping up now. We know the requirements for the future millage starting next year. So we're taking a two-pronged approach. We're speeding up the recruitment process for full-time drivers, and then also trying to supplement the service by committing to part-time drivers also. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get the right number of people hired as required. Right now, I feel pretty confident that we'll reach that point. We've seen a lot of success recently getting new operators to come in. It's a little challenging sometimes when we bring 10 operators in and our success is only 8 at the end. But I have no reason to believe that we won't reach the number of people that we need.
Matt?
And if I might just build on what George has said, and Forrest will caution me here, we are trying to phase in when services start up. We're being cautious about our promises. We don't want to not be able to deliver. But part of that is to be able to hire progressively, not just all at once, but bring people in chunks and bring the services up to speed as well. And if I might, just also sort of reflect back to Susan's question, I think Jesse has a great answer. I am also very eager to hear from board members who want to advocate in a more official way. We've had some, because that can be done under the auspices of the CEO. Advocacy in many respects is a means, and I'm happy to deputize someone who, if you say wants to speak more specifically, I can help facilitate that. We had some board members accompany me to Lansing or DC a little while ago last year. That was advocacy. That was specifically what it was. But it was under the auspices of the CEO, kind of as a temporary staff member in some respects. The important thing there is just to make sure we're all singing from the same hymnal, saying that, what is it we're here for? What are we asking for? And everyone did a great job with that. More than happy to spend time with board members to help get them comfortable with that if anyone would like to.
Yes, Susan.
So you've taken me up on so what about our board approving a resolution at our next board meeting that in essence says we support what's been proposed to the city? So in addition to the Transportation Commission, there's a resolution from our board urging the council that as they consider changes to the roadway, particularly these multi-lane roads, that transit be prioritized. Would that feel comfortable? Should that come from Governance Committee? Could that come from Service Committee? A resolution from the ATA board, I don't know, has gone to the council in a while, but I'm suggesting that maybe it lends weight, that we would come together and urge that the council consider that as very important.
Matt, you have something to add to that?
At the proper time, I think that kind of a thing could be a great new tool in our toolbox. I don't know exactly right now. The thing that was approved in this write-up is not the same thing was discussed last night at the Transportation Commission. That one is still very early on. No decision about bus lanes has been made. But I think that's an intriguing idea and certainly something that we could explore.
And I don't know that it has to be in concert with the Transportation Commission. I think changes are happening all the time. I mean, a good example, you spoke to it, bike lanes are going in everywhere. I don't know that it has to wait. I think that someone advocating, an agency like ours, advocating to the city of Ypsi, the city of Ann Arbor, to the township of Ypsilanti, that we really encourage you strongly to prioritize road width for transit service for our community. I don't know that it has to wait for a commission that we then model ours on theirs. I think separate from that, I think an advocacy is appropriate at any point. I think it lends itself to signal prioritization. I think it lends itself to all sorts of things that we've said in our long-term plan we're going to need if we're actually going to be able to pull this off. And I don't know why it couldn't happen even regardless, just to say, as you consider changes to the roadway, as you consider zoning changes, please consider that we prioritize the transit user in our right-of-way so that we don't lose sight of it. And I think, again, who but we to advocate for that? And I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I think we should be on record asking that the cities make that priority understood. Because if we don't speak for our riders, I don't know who else would. And, you know, Kathleen, you and I have talked about it, about bus stops have been affected by bike lanes. All sorts of things are happening. And it feels like if we don't speak on behalf of our riders, no one else will. And I think that kind of statement, again, could take a variety of shapes, and I'm not sure what committee could take in. But I do think that the councils are waiting. They need an advocacy group to help lend support to what I know they would like to do. And prioritization is going to have pushback. There'll be people saying, you're going to slow down my car. I can't go as fast as I want to go. It helps them to have community organizations to lend support to the vision that the council has announced that they want to go in.
Rich?
So thank you for bringing this up. In reality, I guess the group that right now is kind of tasked with that is the ownership or the Open Dialogue Task Force. And it's like I mentioned earlier, it's been a bit of a multi-step approach because now we're at least getting in front of Ann Arbor City Council, and I do see this as something that we will be able to bring up with them. That's why one of my goals is right now Matt's in front of them, but also at some point to also get Kathleen, where the two of them at least are talking to council in the time that they've allowed for us, which is great. And so I agree. I think more statements from us, more visibility is really critical. And I personally am taking that on as part of what we're trying to do with the Open Dialogue Task Force. So,
Matt?
I'm going to partially disagree with Rich. My charge by you is to run the ball down the field as fast as I can. If I see an opportunity, advocacy is similar to ownership linkage, and I've used that three-legged race metaphor before, that we have to be coordinated and careful. Susan raises the idea of us being able to use resolutions. I think that's an intriguing idea. To her point about why not put a resolution out there now in support of bus lanes, the only pause I would have about asking you to do that, and I feel like I could ask you to do that as an effort on the advocacy thing, separate from ownership linkage, and I'm certainly open to hearing people suggest things. I'd want to have an answer if the council turned around immediately and said, okay, specifically where? I'd like to have that ready, if not part of the resolution. We're not quite there yet. So it's partially a question of picking the opportune moment to when we insert ourselves into those things, that we've got what we need. I don't mean 100% information. I don't mean 100% ready on every single front, but we've got enough that if the door does open, that we can run the ball further down the field, and that I don't have to reprioritize staff to suddenly go chase a new task that we hadn't been discussing, that all of a sudden we now have a project on our hands that stemmed out of a resolution. So that's more about just making sure internally we're coordinated and that we can follow through on those sorts of things. And I do believe, and I can't say a whole lot more tonight, but we are closer to being able to stand up our local and state advocacy mechanisms than we have been in a while. I look forward to bringing you more about that. I can't tonight.
So I seldom disagree with you, but I'm going to do a small disagreement tonight. It's been my experience that that kind of question would be directed to staff, and that would be a shared job of our staff with city staff, and it would be an evolutionary process. They wouldn't know, the same way when the city passed a Vision Zero resolution. They said, we want to make it safe in our right of way because accidents will happen, but when an accident happens, it will not be a fatal accident, and if anything, we'd like it to not even have an injury. They didn't say what streets the traffic speeds are going to be reduced to 25, what streets they're being reduced to 15. They didn't say where lane widths are going to be removed because we're going to get to this goal, crosswalks are going to be installed. They established a vision statement, a value statement of Vision Zero, after which then staff have the job to implement as they put their road projects together. And I think the same would be true where the ATA is brought in as city staff is looking at their road projects, as city staff is looking at striping, as city staff is looking at bike lanes. The implementation then falls at that point when those specific projects come forward. But things like Vision Zero came forward because we all recognize kids being killed out in the middle of the road, crossing the street to get to a school is the wrong thing. We can't let that happen. Now let's figure out the details after we've approved that. So again, I think advocating on behalf of transit users, transit riders, a statement could be made without having the risk of having to have a detailed implementation plan, because I don't think the city itself would be ready to accept an implementation plan. It's going to be a gradual process of interpretation as individual projects come forward.
Susan, you bring forward a very good question, but I'd like to pose it to the board. So in other words, what I'm hearing is you'd like to have some sort of resolution to put forward our position so that we're clear and that our other agencies like U of M and City Council feel that we are more aligned with what is going on with them. And what I want to hear from the rest of the board is, do you find value in a resolution? If you do find value in a resolution, first of all, I think that that would be impossible to have before December. There's a lot of things to unpack there and questions to answer. But if the board does find it valuable, then I would think that we should send that to the governance committee to spearhead, to work with Matt and staff to address some of staff's concerns, Matt's concerns that I believe are also very valid. But I don't want to just leave here tonight and leave it up in the air. So I'd like to open it up to the board. In terms of, does anybody not see value in having some sort of resolution or written statement from the board? Jesse.
I just wanted to bring up a procedural point, just to your question about how does our policy 345 says that a board member may recommend or request an item for board discussion by submitting the item to the CGO no later than 2 days before the board meeting. And so I would say if we have a resolution, you could turn it into Kathleen 2 days before. That said, I would like to spend more time on this. I'm in wholehearted agreement with you, and I don't think that a resolution need be like too heavily influenced by operational concerns, because that's not our job. A statement by the board probably shouldn't be getting into all of those questions. And I think if anything, we should be saying, we want you to be doing bus lanes. And if they ask us where, they'll say, well, that's Matt, go talk to Matt. So I think I'm in whole full-throated agreement to put forward a resolution expressing support for bus lanes. There's a particular stretch of road, I think, let's make it bus only. So the whole stretch. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Are there any other thoughts or? Would the board be amenable then to the governance committee exploring Susan's idea and coming back to you with something more concrete, if not at the December meeting, at the January meeting, but just to know that it's been addressed? And Matt, or Jesse, you may know this too, point of order better. Do we need to take a vote on this, or is general consensus enough to move forward with this task?
I don't see anything that says that we need to take a vote to take up an issue. I mean, we did earlier today. We decided to take on the issue of public safety, not with the board vote, but just after discussion.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
So then if everyone is amenable, if we have a consensus, because I haven't had anything presented in the negative, the governance committee will move forward in looking at a resolution. And as we move forward, Susan, I would also like to continue to get your input on that. So there may be a way to involve further, okay? All right, thank you. All right, did that complete your CEO report, Matt? Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, no, I'm done.
No, you're not, because you have alternative board meeting locations coming up.
Good try.
So the question was posed to us some time ago. This board has met in this room for many years when we're not on Zoom. Before that, we met in our headquarters on South Industrial Highway. To my knowledge, the board has never met anywhere else, although it could have happened in the past. In 2014, this agency officially expanded to incorporate Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township into our governance structure. They're not just POSA members, they're members. Why not have board meetings in those jurisdictions occasionally or in some routine fashion? Governance committee charged us to begin looking into, are there any feasible locations? I want to compliment Deb Holt and Mike Blackston, really looking into our opportunities. We do believe we've found a very viable one in downtown Ypsilanti, Riverside Arts Center. Right up Pearl Street, 2 blocks from the Ypsilanti Transit Center. I am informed today that scheduling would be available for this time block in January, February, and March, at least for now. The way I might suggest, if the board is interested, because I believe, I think it's kind of your decision where you meet. I do need advance notice of it. I would suggest we consider it as a pilot project because we're a little unsure about some of the technology, the Zoom meeting hookups, all these other things. We'd probably want to test drive it first, and then want to make sure we have our communications protocols correctly so that you guys don't show up here when the rest of you are over there or something like that. So if it's something you're interested in, we think we've found you a place, we think it could be viable, we'd suggest a test run, do it at least once, and then discuss if you want to do it again, and if so, how frequent.
If I might make a suggestion, hearing the dates that you presented, I would like to go more towards the spring. When I think about an alternate location, then you start to add the weather factor and all of that in for people having to travel. We may not want to have it in February, where February is known to be very cold and nasty. So I would prefer something more in the spring-like area, but that's just my opinion. Do we have any other thoughts from the board? Jesse?
As one who will be traveling in that weather, I would like to have that meeting closer to home.
As one who is disabled and has a wheelchair, I'd like to be someplace that I know I can get through the sidewalks.
I think that's it. That's the question, board member comfort, or there's also, one of the reasons for doing this is to make the meeting more accessible to the constituents. And right now, the meetings are significantly less accessible for those reasons to members of the Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township community.
And I do hear that. I also know that, January and February, it's still dark very early. I don't know that, I can't prognosticate, but I don't know that bringing it to Ypsilanti will garner any more people in the middle of winter than it does than we get public here in Ann Arbor in the winter. I don't know how to even look at that. I was just thinking in terms of knowing, I don't really travel Ypsilanti very much in the winter because I do have a very difficult time navigating that area in the winter time. Here, what I appreciate is the DDA is very good about making sure that sidewalks and things are cleared pretty quickly so that the walking public can, maneuver around our area. So if you're I do hear your point of view. I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy and downplay the importance of having persons from Ypsilanti. That's the whole reason why the board wanted to explore going out of the Ann Arbor area and into the Ypsilanti area to have meetings to make it more accessible. And so I hear your point of view, and thank you.
I just wanted to bring up the counterpoint.
No, I agree. I do agree. Maybe I was being a little selfish on my part. I don't know. We'll just have to see how that rolls out. Mike?
Yeah, I think you don't have to be selfish, Kathleen. I think it's important that we make this a success, and I think the chances of it being successful would be greater if we do wait till a little bit better weather.
Fair enough. All right. Hearing no other, Matt, were you expecting an answer this evening, or do you want us to keep this on the agenda or have a discussion at the committee level meetings more robustly?
I would ask if no other board members have feedback, and maybe that this gets kicked to the governance committee. We've never changed the location, so we don't have a process established, but I do think it may be delegated to the governance committee or the chair. We need to go back and sort of consult the bylaws and the policy manual about who actually has the authority to do it, or do you want to vote of the board like that? So I think with the board leadership is the right place for this conversation to progress.
So then we'll put this on the agenda for the next governance committee meeting to nail it down. All right, fair enough. All right, next on our agenda is action item recap.
Okay. So first of all, I want to thank you for a great meeting, a lot of good discussion. In terms of action items, the policy development raised by Jesse in item 5.1 has been delegated to the safety committee. It'll be taken up there. I'm assuming you wanted us to add it to the next agenda. All right. On the zero emissions bus, the conversation will continue next month. You've given us a lot of questions. We'll begin to feed back answers to that, some of which I think we hit tonight, some of which we may piecemeal back to you or further discussions at the next meeting. Governance committee has been tasked with taking up the question of alternate meeting locations and timing. And that's what I have, Deb.
Did you have anything else, Deb? Did we miss anything? Jesse?
Could you extend an invitation to Rose Mercier for the service committee meeting?
That leads us to topics for next meeting, in addition to zero emission buses, the quarterly forest service report, and ends. Yes, Matt?
If time permits, it's been some time since the board received a sort of formal update on the long-range plan. Some board members are new since the plan was adopted. We've finally gotten some traction with the YTC and the millage stuff starting to move forward. Forrest and I discussed it. If the board's open to it, I don't know if it has to happen in December, but it might be good to happen in December for scheduling reasons. I think an update, just a little bit of background, what is the plan, why is it important, what does it talk about doing and why, and then just a discussion might be useful.
I think that's a very good point, especially since so many of the discussions tonight with regards to the ZEBs focused on the long-range plan and how it may impact or interfere with. So I think a refresh would be good for those of us who were here, but a reintroduction to folks who maybe were not here. So let's see if when we meet tomorrow, if we can squeeze it into the December agenda, but if not, we'll aim for January. All right, that leads us to public comment. Welcome again.
Thank you. Actually, I'm glad I stayed at the end of the meeting. I rarely get a chance to hear how boards operate, so this was very enlightening, if I put it that way. So, I mean, I got to hear a lot about, bike lanes, zero emissions, all the sort of things that the bus service or the RIDE, the organization, is the change that they're undergoing. What really disturbed me, and I'll reiterate here that I am here speaking for the unhoused community because we rarely have a voice, if any, and we rely on the bus in large numbers, and our numbers are increasing. So I would like to see a day when every public entity has a disposition towards the unhoused, because it's not just the nonprofits or the government's problem entirely, in terms of setting policy. I think every entity, private or public actually, but particularly private, should have some sort of disposition towards how it's going to serve the unhoused in its community. And I think it starts with boards like this. One of the things that I was disturbed, as well as, well, it's getting late, I'm trying to keep my thoughts together, but it just struck me as the discussion went on about how buses can be left out in the cold, or can't be left out in the cold under 40 degrees, but people can. And I think we need to start focusing our attention on more humanitarian needs. Our technology is advancing, and it always will, but it shouldn't advance so that it leaves behind people who are marginalized. And the unhoused people, I feel, are the most marginalized people right now in society. So I hope at some point this board will take up the needs of our community, of the unhoused community, and find ways that the ridership, as someone talked about, is inclusive of everyone, particularly transportation. If I haven't already said it, we do need quality transportation, and our needs are different. We have, as I said earlier, lots of belongings, and alternative vehicles. I don't know exactly what they meant, but I heard the word. I think would be some sort of an option that that the board should consider discussing, and not just discussing, but bring it into your fleet. I'm trying to use all your ATA terms, but I hope you won't abandon us going forward. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments, Deb?
Yes, Jim Mogensen, and you are unmuted.
So, Jim Ovenson, so I left to go to a completely different meeting and was wondering whether you were still meeting, and lo and behold, you are. So I look forward to listening to the recording on some of the details that you were talking about. But I think it's really important, when I was looking at those budget numbers that people were talking about relating to the plan for the expansion from the millage, has capital costs associated with it. And when you look at those things, I know people are thinking about that. And there's always that challenge when people are moving forward, there are the political dynamics in the community, particularly in certain parts of the community. And then you have things that are linked, like, for example, what happens amazingly, finally, potentially, with the old YMCA site and that redevelopment, and how things can get unintentionally bumped when trying to prioritize those things. You don't want to be the folks who say, well, we just don't have we have to do the Ipsy Transit Center, we can't do Blake, right? That would create even more issues. And I also wanted to thank Elizabeth for coming, and for bringing that up, to make sure that as people move on the technology, that you don't that you keep tokens and other things in place so people can still keep on riding the bus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deb, is there anyone else?
We do not have any other public commenters.
Thank you so much. That will close out public comment, and we're going to move on to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Susan, seconded by Simi. All in favor, raise your hands. We are adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful weekend and a good holiday.